Each night, a candle is lit and the whispering tomes open. Inside are the strange, the forgotten, the stories time tried to silence. Some say history is written by the victors, but here the lost are given voice. Breathe deeply and follow me into the hidden chapters of history.
Before we begin tonight, this episode is a little different. Rather than simply telling the history of the European witch hunts, we'll be stepping quietly into the world in which they happened, into the villagers' homes, churches, courtrooms, penned everyday lives of the people who lived through them. If you enjoy this more immersive style of history, please consider liking the video and subscribing to Whispering Tones. It helps me know that you'd like to see more long-form journeys like this one. And before you settle in, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Those comments help these videos reach more people, far more than you might imagine, and I genuinely enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, get comfortable, and let's step back into a time when the fear of witchcraft was not a story or a legend, but part of everyday life. Chapter 1. A world where witchcraft was real. To understand the European witch hunts, you first have to enter a world in which witchcraft was not merely a story. For many Europeans living during the 16th and 17th centuries, supernatural forces belonged to the accepted possibilities of everyday life. God existed, the devil existed, angels and demons existed. Miracles, divine punishment, curses, and harmful magic were all considered possible by large portions of society. This did not mean ordinary villagers spent every waking hour terrified. Most people had far more immediate concerns. Animals needed feeding, bread needed baking, roofs needed repairing, children needed raising, and fields needed planting before the season passed. Witchcraft often remained somewhere in the background of life, barely noticed until something went wrong. Imagine an early morning in a small European settlement. Mist hangs low beyond the houses, and the road is packed hard from carts, livestock, and generations of footsteps. Smoke rises through the cool air as hearth fires are stirred back to life. A woman carries water from the village well. Somewhere behind a timber wall, a cow shifts against its stall. Farther away, the first strokes of a church bell pass over. The rooftops. Nothing about the scene appears sinister. There are no pointed hats hanging beside doors, no strange figures moving through the woods, and no obvious signs that you have entered the age of the witch hunts. The people accused of witchcraft usually came from this same ordinary landscape. They walked these roads, attended these churches, bought food in these markets, borrowed tools, argued over property, and stood beside their neighbors at weddings and funerals. The suspected, which was rarely a mysterious stranger, more often it was someone everyone already knew. Belief in witchcraft existed inside a society that was overwhelmingly Christian. Church bells divided the day. Religious festivals shaped the year. Children were baptized. Couples married under religious authority, and the dead were buried according to Christian rites. Sermons warned people about sin, temptation, judgment, salvation, and the presence of evil. The devil was not treated simply as a symbol of wickedness. Many Christians regarded him as a real spiritual enemy capable of influencing the world. Yet formal Christianity existed alongside generations of local customs. Families knew remedies for illness. Farmers used traditional protections for animals. Certain objects might be placed near a doorway or inside a stable. Words could be spoken over wounds, and protective marks might be scratched into beams, walls, or thresholds. A modern observer might divide these practices into religion, medicine, superstition, and magic. But the people using them did not always separate them so neatly. A mother might pray for a sick child and also prepare an herbal remedy taught to her by another woman. A farmer could attend church faithfully while believing that an object hidden near his stable might protect his livestock from supernatural harm. People sometimes sought help from individuals believed to possess unusual knowledge. In England, historians often describe some of these figures as cunning folk. Similar people existed elsewhere under different names. They might prepare remedies, attempt to locate stolen property, identify the source of a suspected curse, or provide charms intended to protect a household. Many would have strongly rejected the accusation that they were witches. To them, there could be an enormous difference between using knowledge to protect someone and using supernatural power to cause harm. That harmful magic is often described by historians using the Latin word malef. It could mean causing illness, ruining crops, killing livestock, interfering with childbirth, spoiling food, causing pain, or even bringing about death. And accusations of maleficium often began with situations that were completely ordinary. Picture two households standing only a short distance apart. The families have known each other for years. Perhaps they have helped one another during harvests, but perhaps they have also argued over boundaries, animals, or debts. One afternoon, a woman walks to her neighbor's door and asks for milk or grain. The request is refused. She leaves angry, and harsh words are exchanged. But at the time, the argument seems no different from countless other disputes between neighbors. Several days later, one of the neighbor's cows becomes sick. It stops eating, its milk declines, and soon the animal dies. For a farming household, this is not a minor inconvenience. A cow represents milk, butter, cheese, income, and security. The family stands beside the dead animal with no clear explanation for what happened. Then someone remembers the argument. They remember the woman standing at the doorway. They remember her anger. Perhaps she said, "You will regret this," or something equally ordinary in the heat of the moment. Now those words sound different. What had been an insult begins to resemble a threat, and the threat appears to have been fulfilled. This pattern appears repeatedly in surviving witchcraft accusations. Conflict occurred first, misfortune followed, and memory connected the two. The animal may have died from disease. A child may have suffered from an infection. A harvest may have failed because of weather. Butter might refuse to churn because of temperature or the quality of the cream. But those explanations were largely invisible. The argument was visible. The angry words were remembered. Once suspicion formed, people began searching backward through memory. Another neighbor remembered a child becoming ill after a disagreement with the same person. Someone else recalled a horse going lame. A brewing vat had spoiled. A storm had damaged a field shortly after the suspected woman had walked nearby. Individually, these events meant little. Together, they could begin constructing a reputation. As daylight disappears from the village, it becomes easier to understand how such fears found a place in everyday life. There are no electric lamps illuminating the road, and no distant cities glowing against the horizon. A candle lights only a small portion of a room. Beyond the doorway, familiar paths vanish into darkness. The edge of a forest becomes a solid, black shape. Branches move in the wind. Animals call from unseen places. And someone walking between houses carries only a lantern whose light reaches a few feet ahead. Darkness did not create belief in witchcraft, but it formed part of the physical world in which those beliefs existed. Stories of danger were attached to real locations. The lonely road, the crossroads, the stable after sunset, the churchyard. Before us, or the cottage, standing just beyond the other houses. Early modern Europeans also lived through enormous uncertainty. Religious division following the Protestant Reformation transformed kingdoms and communities. Wars moved armies through farmland. Disease returned repeatedly. Harvest failures raised food prices, and severe winters or poor growing seasons placed enormous pressure on families that already lived close to the edge of survival. A healthy child might become dangerously ill within a day. A woman could die during childbirth. An entire year's work could be damaged by rain, frost, drought, or hail. None of these hardships automatically caused witch hunts, and many suffering. Communities never experienced large persecutions, but when explanations were limited, supernatural explanations remained available. If disaster had been caused deliberately by another person, then perhaps something could be done about it. Over time, the meaning of witchcraft also became more elaborate. Ordinary villagers often feared harmful magic because they believed a neighbor had injured them, their family, or their property. Learned theologians, judges, lawyers, and demonological writers increasingly connected those fears to the devil. In this developing theory, a witch did more than cast a curse. The witch rejected God, entered into a pact with Satan, received supernatural persist. Stories developed about nocturnal meetings, demonic rituals, magical flight, and gatherings that later became known as the witches' Sabbath. These ideas varied greatly between regions and writers, but they changed how authorities could interpret a simple accusation. A villager might say that a woman had killed his cow. An interrogator could begin asking when she first met the devil. A mother might claim that her child became ill after being cursed. Officials might ask who else belonged to the conspiracy. This difference became extraordinarily dangerous because a secret organization required more than one member. If one which existed, authorities could reason that others must exist as well. Prisoners were asked for names. One accusation led to another arrest, and that arrest could produce additional names. In places where torture was permitted, frightened, prisoners sometimes confessed to whatever interrogators expected to hear. A witch hunt could gradually begin producing its own evidence. Yet, outside the courtroom and prison, ordinary life continued. The blacksmith still worked. Markets opened. Farmers tended animals. Children played between houses. Couples married. Families ate together. And church bells continued marking the passing hours. A person could be questioned for witchcraft while only a few streets away someone repaired a roof or sold vegetables. An execution might draw a crowd, and afterward the people watching returned home to prepare supper and begin another day. History rarely feels like history to the people living inside it most of the time. Even extraordinary events unfold among completely ordinary routines. As evening settles over the village once again, carts disappear from the road and animals are brought under shelter. Smoke hangs above the rooftops while a few windows remain faintly illuminated. Inside one house, a family speaks quietly about something that cannot be explained. Someone remembers an argument. Another person has heard a similar story. No official accusation has been made. No arrest has taken place. For now, there is only suspicion. But this is often where a witch hunt begins, not in a secret gathering deep within the forest, but beside an ordinary hearth, at a doorway near a field, or beside a village well. Before the trials, interrogations, and executions, witchcraft first lived in the fears and suspicions of neighbors. In the next chapter, we will remain inside this world as daylight fades and explore what the village became after sunset. Chapter 2. Waking in the village, you wake before the sun has fully risen for a few moments. There is only darkness and the faint orange glow of dying embers somewhere across the room. The air is cool enough that you can feel it against your face. There is a smell of wood smoke, old timber, wool, and earth. Somewhere very close, something shifts heavily in the dark. A cow, perhaps, or a goat kept beneath the same roof, or just beyond a thin wooden wall. Its movement is followed by the soft scrape of a hoof against packed ground. The room around you slowly takes shape as your eyes adjust. Heavy beams cross the ceiling overhead. The walls are rough and uneven, made from timber, plaster, stone, or whatever materials were common in this part of Europe. A small opening covered by shutters allows a thin grey line of morning light to enter. There is no glass in many ordinary homes, and where glass does exist, it is expensive, imperfect, and usually found in wealthier buildings. The hearth has burned low during the night. A few red coals remain beneath a layer of ash dot. Then you begin to hear the village waking. A rooster calls from somewhere beyond the house. Another answers farther away. A bucket knocks against wood. Someone coughs behind a neighboring wall. A door groans open on its hinges, followed by footsteps crossing. But the damp ground outside. Animals begin making themselves known. Chickens cluck beneath a shelter. A dog barks once and then again. Somewhere in the distance, a horse snorts as it is led from a stable. Finally, above everything else, comes the church bell. The sound travels across the rooftops and fields, low and heavy in the morning air. It reaches every house differently, muffled behind walls and clearer in the open road. But almost everyone hears it. The church is more than a place people visit once a week. Its tower dominates the settlement, and its bells help organize time itself. This is the world in which fears of witchcraft lived, not a dark forest filled with mysterious figures, but a waking village filled with ordinary people beginning another ordinary day. As the light strengthens, activity spreads into the road. Women carry water. Men check animals and tools. Children are sent on errands. Smoke begins rising steadily from chimneys and roof openings as fires are rebuilt. Bread is prepared. Porridge warms over hearth. Wooden wheels begin turning along the road, and everywhere people notice one another. Early modern village life offered far less privacy than most people are accustomed to today. Neighbors often knew who had visited whom, who had quarreled, whose animals were sick, who was borrowing food, who owed money, and which household had experienced some sudden misfortune. Information traveled through conversation at wells, markets, churchyards, alehouses, and doorways. Reputation could become one of the most valuable possessions a person had. It could also become one of the most dangerous things to lose. A woman who was considered generous, respectable, and properly religious might receive sympathy when something unusual happened around her. Someone already regarded as argumentative, dishonest, strange, or threatening might not. The difference rarely depended on a single incident. Reputation accumulated slowly. Perhaps someone had been heard cursing during an argument. Perhaps a neighbor claimed she knew unusual remedies. Perhaps she seemed able to cure an animal when others could not. Perhaps she had predicted that something bad would happen, and later it did. Perhaps several people simply disliked her. Years could pass without any of this becoming serious. Then, one morning, a child became ill, or an animal died, and suddenly old stories returned. As you step outside, the village is fully visible now. Depending on the region, houses may stand close together along a narrow road, or spread more loosely between gardens, workshops, and small fields. Roofs might be thatched, tiled, or covered in wooden shingles. Mud collects in low places. Pigs wander where they are allowed. Chickens search through scraps near doorways. The village does not smell clean by modern standards. Smoke lingers constantly. Animals live close to people. Manure collects near roads and yards. Waste disposal is limited. Water may come from a communal well, a spring, or a nearby stream. In larger settlements, there may be open drains and crowded alleys, dot yet to the people living here. This is home. They know every turn in the road. They know which roof leaks. They know whose dog bites. They know which field floods after heavy rain. They know who makes the best bread and which household produces good ale. They also know where stories gather. An old cottage near the edge of the settlement may already carry a repute. Perhaps an elderly widow lives there. Perhaps nothing unusual has ever happened inside it. But people speak differently when they mention the place. Another house may belong to a healer. People go there when children are sick or animals behave strangely. They may trust the person living there and fear them at the same time. That contradiction was not unusual. A person believed capable of curing supernatural. Harm might also be suspected of causing it. Knowledge itself could become ambiguous. A healer. Who knew which IRB's reduced fever might be valued when treatment worked? If a patient died, the same knowledge could become suspicious. Someone known for charms or protective rituals might be asked for help one year and accused of witchcraft several years later. The boundary between usefulness and fear could be very thin. As morning turns toward midday, the settlement grows louder. A blacksmith begins working somewhere nearby. each hammer strike carrying between the buildings. A cart rattles over the road. Voices rise in conversation. Dogs bark at strangers entering the village. If it is market day, the roads become busier, still with baskets, livestock, cloth, grain, vegetables, tools, and whatever else local people have to sell or exchange. The market is also a place where rumor travels quickly. A woman from another village mentions that several children there have become ill. Someone says an animal was found dead without explanation. Another person has heard that authorities in a nearby town arrested someone for witchcraft. These stories matter because witch hunts could spread culturally before they spread legally. When people heard that witches had been discovered elsewhere, they sometimes reconsidered unexplained events within their own communities. A strange illness that had seemed unfortunate last month might now appear suspicious. People began looking, and when people looked for witchcraft, they often found patterns. The sound of church bells returns through the afternoons. Christianity remains woven into the landscape around you. A crucifix may hang inside a Catholic household. Religious pictures, rosaries, blessed objects, or written prayers might be present, depending on region and period. Protestant homes may reject many of these practices while placing greater emphasis on scripture, sermons, and personal religious discipline. The Reformation created sharp divisions across Europe, but Catholics and Protestants could both accept the existence of witches. Each side might accuse the other of superstition. Each could condemn magical practices, and both could interpret witchcraft as evidence of Satan working in the world. To the modern listener, religion and magic can appear opposed in this village. The relationship is much less simple. A person trying to protect a household might use Christian words in what we would now call a magical charm. Someone might place a written prayer above doorway. Another might bury an object beneath a threshold. Protective marks could be carved into timber near window, fireplaces, and entrances. Places where harmful forces were thought most likely to enter. Some of these markings survive in old European buildings today. They are sometimes called apotropes, marks, meaning marks intended to turn away evil. Circular designs, overlapping lines, burn marks, and other symbols have been found cut into beams and stonework. Not every unusual mark had a magical purpose, and historians must be cautious when interpreting them. But enough evidence survives to show that protection against supernatural harm could become physically built into a home. Imagine one of those. Pauses as afternoon fades inside. Light from the doorway stretches across the floor. Near the hearth, scratches cut into an old beam have darkened with age. No one pauses to explain them. They may have been there since before the youngest children were born. Outside, animals are being brought closer to shelter. This was particularly important because livestock stood at the center of many witchcraft fears. A farming household might depend on a small number of cows, pigs, sheep, or horses. Their health could determine whether a family remained secure. If an animal behaved strangely, people noticed. If several animals became sick, they searched for a cause. Sometimes suspected witchcraft was countered with protective rituals. Objects might be hung inside barns. Prayers might be spoken. In some regions, people performed elaborate folk practices. intended to identify or repel whoever had cast the supposed spell. The details varied enormously across Europe. There was never one universal system of protective magic, but the underlying fear was familiar. Something harmful might enter the household without being seen. As evening approaches, the village begins to change. Work outside slows. Tools are gathered. Animals return behind fences and walls. The blacksmith's hammer falls silent. Market stalls disappear. Smoke becomes thicker as people prepare the evening meal. The temperature drops, and gradually, darkness begins swallowing the edges of the settlement. This transition matters because artificial light is limited and expensive. Tallow candles are available to many households, though they can smoke and smell unpleasant. Beeswax candles burn more cleanly but cost more. Rush lights, oil lamps, hearth fires, and other small sources of light are used depending on location and wealth. None illuminate much space. A room that seemed familiar in daylight becomes a collection of shadows. The fire lights one wall brightly, while the opposite corner almost disappears dot outside. The road that was busy only an hour earlier becomes difficult to see. People do travel after dark, but night encourages caution. The dangers are not imaginary. Roads are uneven, bridges are poor, animals move unseen. Robbery is possible. A person can become lost surprisingly close to home. But practical dangers mingle easily with supernatural ones. Certain places acquire reputations. Crossroads, Churchyards. Ruined buildings, woodland paths, waterways, the spaces beyond cultivated fields. Someone returning home after sunset may quicken their pace without admitting exactly why. A branch snaps somewhere beyond the lantern light. A dog begins barking. Toward an empty road, an owl calls from the trees. The sounds themselves are ordinary, but meaning depends on what a person already believes. Inside the houses, families gather near the hearth. This is where stories are repeated. Someone talks about a strange animal seen near the road. Someone else mentions a neighbor who has been behaving oddly. Perhaps there was another argument at the well. Perhaps a child claims an old woman stared at them. Perhaps a farmer says his cow has stopped giving milk. These conversations are not court testimony. Not yet. They are simply stories being exchanged in a dark room. But stories, repeated often enough, become memories, be shared by an entire community, and shared memories can become evidence. Outside, the church tower is now little more than a black shape above the houses. Most windows have gone dark. The village that seemed visible and practical during the day has become quiet. Only occasional sounds travel between buildings. A crying infant, an animal shifting in its stall, a door closing, the bark of a distant dog somewhere. A person places another piece of wood onto the fire. Someone checks that the door is secured. Perhaps a protective object hangs somewhere nearby, so familiar that no one looks at it anymore, and in another house, only a short distance away. A family is discussing the woman who lives near the edge of the village. They are not accusing her of anything. Not exactly. They are simply remembering the strange thing she said last winter. The animal that died afterward. The child who became sick. The way she seemed to know something before anyone told her tomorrow. Those stories may be repeated at the well, then at the market, then after church for tonight. However the village settles beneath the darkness, the hearth burns lower, the road becomes empty, and beyond the last houses, where cultivated fields give way to woodland, almost nothing can be seen at all. Chapter 3. Protecting the home from evil, morning returns slowly to the village. Pale light reaches through the shutters, revealing the rough grain of the timber walls and the uneven surface of the floor. The fire has nearly gone out again, leaving only a faint warmth around the hearth. Somewhere outside, a wooden gate opens with a dull creak. A dog shakes itself awake. Chickens begin scratching beneath the eaves. And from farther down the road comes the familiar rhythm of someone drawing water from a well before anyone leaves the house. However, there are small things that deserve attention. The door must be opened, the fire must be rebuilt, animals must be checked, food must be prepared. To modern eyes, these are simple household routines. But in early modern Europe, the home was more than shelter. It was the center of a family's survival. And almost everything important passed through its walls: food, children, animals, money, illness, birth, death, and reputation. If harmful forces existed in the world, then the household was one of the first places people wanted to protect. Walk toward the doorway and look more closely at the old timber surrounding it. The surface is worn smooth in places by hands and years of use. Elsewhere, scratches and shallow carvings remain in the wood. Some are meaningless damage. Others may have been made deliberately. Across surviving buildings in Britain and part of Europe, researchers have found markings often interpreted as protective symbols, sometimes called apotropaic marks. They appear near doors, windows, fireplaces, and other openings. Precisely the places where danger was imagined to cross from outside to inside. Certain designs appear repeatedly: interlocking circles, compass-drawn patterns, lines forming shapes, sometimes known as Marian marks, burn marks, deliberately placed into beams. Historians remain careful about assigning magical meaning to every unusual scratch found in an old building. But there is strong evidence that some households deliberately marked their homes in hopes of turning away harmful supernatural influence. The marks could become part of the building itself, quietly remaining above generations of people who slept, ate, argued, and raised children beneath them. The doorway carried special significance because it represented a boundary. Outside lay roads, strangers, weather-wandering animals, and everything beyond the household's direct control. Inside lay family, food stores, possessions, and the hearth. Thresholds, therefore, attracted protective customs across many regions. An object might be placed above the entrance. Something might be buried beneath it. Iron could be used in protective traditions, and horseshoes later became especially famous. Although the exact meanings and practices varied greatly by time and place, people did not necessarily think of these actions as performing witchcraft. Protection against witchcraft was often considered the opposite of harmful magic. A person might believe entirely in Christian teaching while also using a customary object or ritual that had been passed down through generations. Religion and folk practice could exist together without seeming contradictory to the people involved. The hearth was another vulnerable place. Stand beside it now as flames begin climbing around newly placed wood. Smoke rises toward the chimney while the fire illuminates blackened stone and timber nearby. In many houses, the fireplace was one of the largest openings connecting the interior to the outside world. It provided heat and cooking, but it was also physically open to the sky through the chimney. Stories and protective customs naturally gathered around such spaces. Marks have been found cut into stone and timber surrounding historic fireplaces, apparently intended in some cases to guard the opening. There were more dramatic forms of household protection as well. Archaeologists and building historians have discovered shoes deliberately concealed inside walls, roofs, chimneys, and beneath floors in old buildings. Concealed shoes appear in considerable numbers in Britain and elsewhere, often heavily worn and apparently placed rather than simply discarded. Their exact purpose cannot always be proven. One interpretation is that an old shoe, having taken the shape of its owner's foot, retained something of the person and could serve as a protective object or trap for harmful forces. Other discoveries are stranger still. Bottles containing pins, nails, hair, urine, or other materials have been found buried beneath hearths and thresholds. These objects are commonly called witch bottles. They became especially associated with 17th century England. Their purpose was defensive. Someone who believed themselves afflicted by witchcraft might prepare or obtain such a bottle in an attempt to trap, repel, or injure the supernatural influence believed to be attacking them. Imagine one being prepared in the dim light of a small room. A ceramic bottle sits on a table. Bent pins or nails are placed inside. Other personal material may follow. The vessel is sealed, then carried toward the hearth or another concealed part of the building. Floorboards are lifted, or earth is disturbed. The bottle disappears beneath the house. Once covered again, nothing visible remains. People may walk over it every day for generations without knowing it is there. These practices reveal something important about early modern fear. People did not always respond passively to suspected witchcraft. They tried to defend themselves. If a cow became sick, if a child suffered unexplained fits, or if food repeatedly spoiled, a household might attempt to identify and counter whoever was believed responsible. The first response was not always to call for an arrest. Families could seek remedies long before courts became involved. A person believed to have special knowledge might be consulted. In England, this could mean visiting a cunning man or cunning woman. Such practitioners existed outside formal medicine and official religion, but could play important roles in local communities. They might provide charms, perform divination, identify suspected thieves, locate missing property, offer healing remedies, or attempt to determine whether witchcraft was responsible for a particular problem. The journey to consult one might require several miles of walking. Imagine leaving the village along a narrow road bordered by hedges and fields. The ground is damp beneath your feet. Crows move across recently worked soil. Behind you, the church tower gradually becomes smaller. Ahead is another settlement where someone is said to possess unusual knowledge. People may travel there quietly, perhaps unwilling to advertise the visit. If the problem is a sick child or dying livestock, however, embarrassment matters less than finding help. The practitioner listens to the problem. Perhaps an animal became ill after a quarrel. Perhaps someone has suffered recurring pain that ordinary remedies have failed to relieve. The cunning person may pray, examine objects, consult written material, cast lots, or use a method specific to local tradition. Sometimes a suspected which is named, sometimes a charm is provided. Sometimes instructions are given for breaking the supposed spell. This could create a dangerous chain of events. A household already suspicious of a neighbor might visit a magical practitioner looking for confirmation. If the practitioner pointed toward the same person, uncertainty could harden into belief. What began as a private fear could then become an accusation repeated throughout the community. Animals received particular attention because their health mattered enormously. Step into a small stable in the evening and the importance becomes obvious. A cow stands only a few feet away, its breath visible in the cold air. Leather straps hang from wooden pegs. Hay covers the floor. The smell of animals, straw, and damp timber fills the enclosed space. For the family who owns this cow, its survival may influence everything from the food on the table to whether rent can be paid. If the animals suddenly stopped giving milk, people wanted an explanation. If 2 animals died within a short period, fear increased. Protective objects might be placed in barns or stalls. Religious words could be spoken. Folk remedies could be tried. Some customs involved iron, herbs, salt, fire, or other materials thought to possess protective qualities. Practices differed considerably across regions, and many changed over time. But livestock remained one of the most common settings for suspected supernatural harm. Milk itself carried particular importance. In dairy-producing households, milk became butter and cheese, both valuable foods and commodities. When butter failed to form during churning, frustration could quickly become suspicion. The process depended on conditions that ordinary people could not always control. Temperature, cream quality, contamination, and other factors might all cause failure. Yet if the problem occurred shortly after a disliked neighbor had visited, the explanation could become personal. Picture the churn standing near the hearth. Someone has been working it for far longer than expected. The repetitive sound fills the room. The cream refuses to become butter. Arms grow tired. A second person tries. Still nothing. Then someone remembers who came through the door that morning. A woman asked to borrow something. She touched the edge of the table. Perhaps she looked toward the churn before leaving. The next time she approaches the house, the reception may be colder. Protection was also directed toward children and newborns. Infant mortality was painfully high, and many childhood illnesses could appear suddenly. Without modern medicine, parents often faced sickness with very few reliable treatments. Religious prayers, herbal remedies, traditional customs, and protective objects could all become part of the response. A family might never describe these practices as magical. They were simply things people did because parents and grandparents had done. Before, childbirth carried similar danger. A successful birth could quickly become life-threatening for either mother or infant. Midwives and experienced women assisted with deliveries, drawing upon practical knowledge developed across generations. Despite later popular stories, midwives were not universally targeted as witches, nor were witch hunts simply campaigns against female healers. Still, birth took place within the same world of supernatural belief, and unexplained complications could sometimes become attached to suspicion. As afternoon fades, the house begins preparing for another night. A bundle of herbs hangs drying near the wall. An old iron object rests near the door. Scratches cut into a beam remain visible only when the firelight reaches them at the correct angle. Beneath the floor there may be nothing at all, perhaps an object placed there decades ago by someone who believed it would keep the family safe. Outside, the settlement darkens. Doors close. Livestock settles into stalls. A final column of smoke rises against the evening sky. The protective practices surrounding these homes were not signs that everyone lived in constant terror. Most were simply woven into routine. No, more remarkable to the people performing them than locking a door might be today. But protection implies danger. If charms existed to turn away witchcraft, then witchcraft had to be something worth turning away. If a bottle could trap a curse, then someone must have sent that curse. If a protective mark guarded the doorway, something dangerous might attempt to cross it, and eventually a frightened household might stop asking how to protect itself and begin asking a different question. Who is doing this to us? In the next chapter, that question will lead us deeper into the world of healers, curses, charms, and the uneasy boundary between helpful magic and the kind of magic that could place a person's life in danger. Chapter 4. Healers, Curses, and Forbidden Knowledge. The road beyond the village is quiet in the early morning. Dew clings to the grass along the edges of the fields, and the damp earth gives slightly beneath each step. Somewhere ahead, beyond, a stand of trees and a low stone wall, lives someone people visit when ordinary explanations fail. The house is not hidden. No one has to travel through a secret forest to find it. It may look much like any other home nearby, with smoke rising. Plumb the roof and bundles of plants hanging beneath the eaves. But yet the person inside has a reputation. Perhaps she knows how to prepare a remedy for fever. Perhaps he is said to find stolen objects. Someone claims this person once identified a thief without leaving the house. Another says a sick cow recovered after receiving a charm. A mother remembers bringing a child here when nothing else seemed to help. Stories like these travel quietly from village to village. They are enough to make the journey worthwhile. People with such reputations existed throughout early modern Europe, though their names and roles varied by region. In England, some became known as cunning men or cunning women. Elsewhere, communities had healers, charmers, diviners, wise women, blessing specialists, and other figures whose practices occupied uncertain territory between medicine, religion, folklore, and magic. Most were not hiding from society. Their neighbors often knew exactly who they were. People sought them out. That fact complicates the modern idea that anyone associated with magic automatically faced persecution. Early modern communities could make important distinctions between magic believed to help and magic believed to harm. A person who claimed to break a curse might be valued precisely because witchcraft was feared dot inside the small house. The light is dim, even though morning has arrived. A fire burns beneath an iron pot. Dried herbs hang from a beam, their leaves brittle and dark. A wooden table holds bowls, scraps of paper, perhaps a Bible or prayer book if the owner can read. Some practitioners used written charms containing religious language. Others relied upon spoken formula types, objects, or methods learnt from relatives and older members of the community. A visitor sits nearby and explains the problem. For 3 weeks, pain has moved through her body without explanation. Or perhaps the problem is not illness at all. A silver spoon has disappeared. A horse refuses to eat. A child wakes screaming each night. Milk spoils too quickly. Something feels wrong inside the prax. The practitioner listens. What follows might resemble medicine, prayer, divination, or some combination of all three. There was rarely a clean boundary. An herbal mixture might contain ingredients with genuine medicinal value. A prayer might be spoken over it. A charm could be written beside a Christian symbol. A ritual might appeal directly to God while also using methods that clergy considered superstitious or forbidden to the person asking for help. The theological distinction may matter less than whether the child recovers. This practical attitude helped folk healers survive for generations. When treatment worked, their reputation improved. When it failed, the consequences could be more complicated. A healer who was trusted for knowing how to cure illness might also be suspected of knowing how to cause it. The same knowledge could be interpreted in 2 directions. If someone understands how a curse can be broken, perhaps they understand how one is made. If someone knows which herbs heal, perhaps they also know which ones harm. If someone can identify a witch, perhaps they themselves possess suspicious powers. Useful knowledge could become dangerous knowledge very quickly. This was especially true when relationships inside the community began to change. Imagine a healer who has lived in the same settlement. For 30 years, people have visited her quietly for headaches, sick animals, painful births, and missing property. She has never been arrested. The local authorities know about her and largely ignore what she does. Then a child dies. The family had visited her days earlier. The remedy failed. Grief changes the way every previous encounter is remembered. Someone asks whether the medicine truly failed or whether something worse happened. A neighbor recalls an argument with the healer. Several years earlier, another person says she always seemed to know too much. The same reputation that once brought people to her door now draws suspicion toward it. Not every healer experienced this reversal, and historians warn against assuming that most accused witches were folk healers. Many were not. But the possibility illustrates how unstable reputation could become in communities where magic was accepted as real. Curses were especially dangerous because they could be spoken during ordinary conflict. People in early modern Europe argued just as people do now. They insulted one another, shouted, threatened, and said things they later regretted. But when harmful magic was considered possible, angry words could acquire unusual weight. Suppose two women argue beside the village. Well, one accuses the other of taking more water than she should. Voices rise. Others stop to listen. Finally, one woman turns away and says that the other will soon regret humiliating her. A week later, the second woman becomes sick. She lies inside her house with fever and pain. The shutters are partly closed, leaving the room in shadow. A bowl of untouched food rests nearby. Relatives move quietly around the bed. Someone remembers the argument. Then someone repeats the words, "You will regret this." The phrase becomes more important each time it is spoken. What had sounded like anger now sounds like prediction. Prediction becomes evidence. The suspected curse might involve no ritual at all. Sometimes words were enough. An angry look could be remembered, a gesture, a touch, the giving or refusal of food, the appearance of an unusual animal near the house afterward. Early modern witchcraft accusations often grew from sequences like, "Do this because the sequence itself appeared," convincing to the people involved. First the quarrel, then the threat, then the misfortune. Cause and effect seemed obvious. Protective magic could make the process even more complicated. In some areas, people believed the certain counter-magic could reveal the identity of a witch. A household might perform a ritual intended to cause pain to whoever had cast the original spell. If a suspicious neighbor then appeared at the door, complaining of discomfort or asking for something, the coincidence might be interpreted as proof. Other practices attempted to force the suspected witch to reveal themselves. A household might boil, burn, pierce, or heat objects associated with the supposed curse. These actions were meant to turn the harmful magic back upon its sender. Picture a kitchen late at night. The door is closed. Firelight moves across the walls while something is heated over the hearth. The family gathered nearby is not trying to summon evil. They believe they are defending themselves from it outside. The village is almost silent. Then someone knocks at the door. If the visitor happens to be the person already suspected, the coincidence may seem terrifyingly convincing. From the perspective of those inside, the ritual worked. The witch has come. This is one reason belief could reinforce itself so effectually. Once a person became suspicious, ordinary events could be interpreted through that suspicion. A visit was no longer simply a visit. A request became an attempt to break the counterspell. An illness became evidence that protective magic had struck. Its target, the accused person, could become trapped inside an explanation they did not control. Animals also appeared frequently in stories of witchcraft. Later folklore would make the familiars the animal companion of a witch, one of the most recognizable features of witch imagery. Cats became particularly famous, but surviving accounts describe many kinds of creatures: dogs, birds, mice, insects, pears, and strange beings that did not resemble ordinary animals at all. Belief in familiars became especially significant in parts of England and Scotland. Some accused people were said to keep spirits that assisted them in performing harmful magic. These spirits might supposedly appear as small animals and receive food or blood from the witch dot again. Learned theory and local belief could overlap. A Novum might simply notice that an unusual animal appeared repeatedly near someone's house. An interrogator could transform that observation into something more elaborate. What was the animal called? When did it first appear? What did it promise? What did you feed it? questions could create a structure around an accusation that had originally been vague. A frightened prisoner might eventually supply the answers expected outside the courtroom. Meanwhile, ordinary animals continued wandering through the village. Cats moved through barns. Dogs followed carts. Mice lived inside walls. Birds entered roofs and chimneys. A hare running across a field was simply a heron. Someone already believed it was something else. That uncertainty gave supernatural explanations extraordinary flexibility. Almost anything could become evidenced after the fact. By late afternoon, the healer's house is quiet again. The visitor has left carrying a small packet of herbs, and perhaps a written charm folded carefully. Inside cloth. The road back toward the village passes between fields, where workers are finishing the day. Nothing dramatic has happened. No spell has been cast. No court has become involved. This is the quieter world of early modern magic. The world that existed beneath the famous trials. People seeking help. People fearing curses. People using old customs because their parents had used them. People mixing prayer, medicine, and tradition without believing they were doing anything extraordinary. But the same beliefs that offered comfort could also prepare the ground for accusation. If magic could heal, perhaps it could harm. If a curse could be broken, perhaps someone had cast it. If invisible forces could affect a household, someone might eventually be blamed for directing them. As darkness returns, the practitioner closes the door and tends the fire. Somewhere in the village, another family is watching a sick child. A cow has stopped eating in a nearby barn. Two neighbors are still angry after an argument earlier that afternoon. For now, these events remain separate, but all it may take is one remembered threat, one sudden death, or one frightened witness to bind them together. And once misfortune begins, demanding a human explanation, suspicion can move very quickly from the hearth to the courtroom. Chapter 5. When misfortune needed an explanation, rain has been falling for most of the night. By morning, the road through the village has become a ribbon of dark mud, churned by boots, hooves, and cartwheels. Water drips steadily from thatched roofs. Beyond the houses, fields disappear beneath a low grey sky. The smell of wet earth mixes with smoke from hearth fires, and somewhere nearby a gate bangs slowly in the wind. Inside one of the cottages, however, the weather is not the greatest concern. A child lies beneath a wool blanket, burning with fever. Her mother has been awake beside her since before dawn. A bowl of water rests near the bed. Herbs have been prepared. Prayers have been spoken. Nothing has changed. For people living in early modern Europe, misfortune was unavoidable. Disease, injury, failed harvests, infant mortality, livestock deaths, fire, storms, and sudden accidents belonged to ordinary life. Most families experienced losses that would seem overwhelming by modern standards. A child could appear healthy in the morning and become dangerously ill before nightfall. A minor wound could become infected. A difficult birth could kill both mother and infant. A single storm could flatten crops that had taken months of labor to grow. These disasters did not always produce accusations of witchcraft. Most were accepted, however painfully, as sickness, accident, bad weather, divine will, or simple misfortune. But sometimes an event arrived with circumstances that seemed too strange to ignore. The sick child in the cottage has not improved. By afternoon, neighbors begin visiting. They bring food, suggestions, remedies, and stories of similar illnesses. One woman remembers a plant that helped her own son several years earlier. Another recommends sending for someone with medical knowledge. A third asks a question that changes the atmosphere in the room. Was there any trouble before the illness began? The mother thinks for a moment. There had been an argument. Several days earlier, an older woman from farther down the road had come asking for bread. She had been refused. Food stores were running low. The woman left angry. Perhaps she said something as she walked away. Now everyone wants to know exactly what she said. This was one of the most dangerous habits of human memory during periods of witchcraft fear. Misfortune encouraged people to search backward for a cause, and once they began searching, ordinary conflicts could take on new significance. A harsh sentence spoken in anger became a curse. An unpleasant glance became deliberate. A visit that had seemed unimportant suddenly became suspicious. The human mind is extraordinarily good at finding patterns, particularly after something frightening has already happened. The child's illness may have begun with an infection. No one in the room can see it. They cannot examine bacteria beneath. A lens or test blood for disease. What they can see is the sequence of events. A woman asked for bread. She was refused. She became angry. Then the child became sick. To frighten parents. The connection may feel far more tangible than an invisible natural cause. Across the village, another household faces a different problem. A cow has stopped producing milk. The animal stands quietly in its stall, ribs moving. Beneath its hide as it breathes. Its owner checks the feed, runs a hand along its side, and looks for some sign of injury. Nothing obvious appears. The loss of milk matters immediately. There will be less butter and cheese. Less food can be stored. Less can be sold. If the animal grows worse, the household may lose one of its most valuable possessions. Someone remembers that a neighbor had admired the cow recently. Another recalls that the same neighbor once complained that the family had too much, while others struggled. A third person mentions hearing that milk had failed in another household after the same woman visited. None of these details proves anything, but proof, as understood in a modern scientific sense, is not what is being assembled. A story is being assembled, and stories could become remarkably convincing. A storm offered another kind of uncertainty. Imagine standing near the edge of the settlement as the summer sky darkens. Wind moves through the grain in long waves. Birds disappear. The first drops strike the road, followed by sudden, hard rain. Then comes hail. Within minutes, plants are battered flat. Water runs between furrow. A family watches months of work being destroyed in less than an hour. Across a nearby boundary, another field survives with less damage. Why one field? Why not the other? Weather can be uneven even across very short distances, but without modern meteorology, such patterns could invite explanation. In regions where weather magic formed part of local witch belief, storms, hail, frost or destructive winds might be blamed on supernatural interference. Demonological writers went further, debating whether witches with demonic assistance could influence the weather at all. The uncertainty itself was dangerous. When people could not see a mechanism, intention could fill the gap. Fire created similar suspicion. Early modern homes were extraordinarily vulnerable to it. Open hearths, candles, timber walls, thatched roofs, barns filled with dry hay, and closely spaced buildings created constant risk. A spark could destroy a household. Flames could leap from one roof to another before water was gathered. Yet if a house burned shortly after a threat had been made, the disaster could be interpreted through witchcraft. Picture a fire beginning after midnight. Someone wakes to shouting. Orange light flickers through gaps in the shutters. Doors open across the road. People rush outside carrying buckets. Smoke pours upward while sparks move across the darkness. Animals panic behind fences. Neighbors form a line between the well and the burning building, passing water hand to hand. By dawn, the roof is gone and part of the house has collapsed. Pour into blackened timber. As everyone stands in the wet ash and smoke, someone remembers an argument from the week before. Again, disaster looks backward and finds a person. Death was the most powerful misfortune of all. When someone died unexpectedly, grief encouraged questions that ordinary explanations could not always satisfy. Why did this person die? Why now? Why after that argument, that visit, that threat, in societies where sudden death was familiar but poorly understood? Suspicion could become one way of giving tragedy a recognizable shape. Children were especially important in many accusations because their illnesses could be sudden and frightening. Fits, convulsions, fainting, paralysis, unusual. Behavior and unexplained pain could all be interpreted through supernatural belief. Some conditions that modern medicine might identify as epilepsy, infection, neurological illness, psychological distress, or other disorders had no reliable explanation available to early modern observers. A child experiencing violent convulsions could transform an entire household. Furniture is pushed aside. Relatives hold the child down to prevent injury. Someone runs for help. Neighbors gather near the doorway. Prayers are repeated. Then the child, frightened and confused, points toward someone or says a name. The atmosphere changes instantly. Children were not always passive figures in witchcraft cases. In some famous episodes, their testimony became central. Adults questioned them, interpreted their behavior, and sometimes encouraged increasingly elaborate claims. Once a child's suffering was linked to a particular person, every new fit could reinforce the accusation. Misfortune could also accumulate. One strange event might be dismissed. Several became harder to ignore. A household loses a pig. A child develops fever. Grain spoils. Then a horse becomes lame. Over months, unrelated problems begin to resemble persecution. If the family already suspects someone, the pattern becomes even clearer in their minds. This accumulation explains why accusations sometimes contained long lists of alleged injuries, stretching back years. Witnesses could stand before authorities and describe incident after incident. A cow that died, a child who became sick, bread that failed, an unexplained pain, an animal behaving strangely. Each event was remembered through the same person. Reputation made the process uneven. When misfortune followed an argument with a respected neighbor, people might call it coincidence. When it followed an argument with someone already feared, it might be interpreted as confirmation. The accused person's past became a lens through which new events were understood. This could create an almost impossible situation. Imagine being the person whose name is beginning to circulate. You know that a neighbor's child is sick. You also know that you argued with the family several days ago. When you walk toward the well, conversation becomes quieter. Someone turns away. A child is called back toward a doorway. You may hear nothing directly, but the change is obvious. Perhaps you try to repair the damage. You visit the family. You ask about the child. That visit may be interpreted as concern, or as evidence that you know your magic is working. Perhaps you stay away, then your absence seems suspicious. Perhaps you become angry at the rumors. Your anger confirms that you are dangerous. Perhaps you remain calm. Your calmness appears unnatural. Once a community has decided that someone may be responsible for supernatural harm, almost any behavior can be made to fit the accusation. Even pretense to help could become evidence. If the sick person improved after the suspected witch visited, someone might claim the witch had removed the spell to avoid suspicion. If the victim worsened, the visit had strengthened it. If nothing changed, the curse remained in place. This is one of the reasons witchcraft accusations could become so difficult to escape. The belief system was flexible enough to absorb contradiction. By late evening, the rain has finally stopped. Water still drips from the roofs, but the clouds are breaking apart above the village. Inside the cottage, the sick child has fallen asleep. Her breathing is quieter now. The fire burns low beside the family gathered nearby. Perhaps she will recover by morning. If she does, the accusation may disappear, or perhaps the family will decide their prayers or remedies defeated the curse. If she worsens, someone may finally go to the local authorities. Outside, footsteps pass through the mud. A lantern moves slowly between the houses and disappears around a corner. In another home, the woman who was refused bread has no idea that her name has been spoken several times tonight. For now, nothing has formally happened. There has been no arrest, no interrogation, no trial, only misfortune, memory, and suspicion. But once people believe they know who is responsible, the question changes. They are no longer asking why the child became sick, why the animal died, or why the harvest failed. They are asking what should be done about the person who caused it. And in the next chapter, we will follow that suspicion as it settles around. One individual turning an ordinary neighbor into someone the entire community begins to recognize as a witch. Chapter 6. How someone became a witch. The woman at the center of the whispers does not wake, knowing that anything has changed. Morning enters through the shutters in a thin, gray line. The hearth is cold, and the room carries the familiar smell of ash, wool, old timber, and yesterday's cooking. Outside, a cart moves slowly along the road. someone calls to an animal. A church bell sounds across the village. She dresses, rebuilds the fire, and begins the same work she has performed hundreds of times before, yet beyond the walls of her house. Her name is already moving from one person to another. This was how many accusations began, not with authorities arriving suddenly at the door, but with reputation changing quietly inside the community. A suspected, which was often someone who had lived among her accusers for years. Neighbors knew her family, her habits, her arguments, and perhaps even the difficulties of her life. What changed was not necessarily the person herself. What changed was the meaning assigned to things she had already done. An argument became a threat. An unusual remedy became suspicious knowledge. A sharp temper became evidence of dangerous intent. A prediction remembered after the event became proof that she had known what was coming at the village well that morning. Conversation pauses when someone approaches. Buckets rest beside the stone edge, while water drips from the rope. One woman mentions the sick child from the night before. Another asks whether the fever has broken. Then, in a lower voice, someone asks whether anyone remembers the quarrel several days earlier. The question does not yet contain an accusation, but everyone understands whose name is being discussed. Someone remembers that the same woman once argued with another family whose horse later died. Another person recalls that milk spoiled after she visited. A third says she has always been strange. By the time the buckets are lifted and everyone returns home, several separate memories have become part of one story. People accused of witchcraft often occupied complicated positions within their communities. Women made up the majority of the accused across much of Western and Central Europe, but there was no single type of woman who became a target. Some were poor widows, others were married women with established households. Some were elderly, while others were young. Some possessed property, and some depended heavily upon neighbors for food or assistance. Men were accused as well, and in certain regions they formed a significant proportion of prosecutions. The popular image of every accused witch as an isolated old healer is far too simple. What often mattered was conflict. Early modern villages depended heavily upon cooperation, but that cooperation could produce resentment. People borrowed tools, shared access to fields, relied upon neighbors during harvests, exchanged food, and helped one another in emergencies. The same closeness created endless opportunities for disagreement. A borrowed object was not returned. An animal crossed a boundary. Someone was refused charity. A debt remained unpaid. A family believed another had taken more than its share of common resources. These disputes could remain ordinary for years, but if misfortune followed one of them, the conflict gained a supernatural explanation. Charity could be particularly important. In communities where poverty was visible and assistance often came directly from neighbors, refusing a request could create both guilt and resentment. Imagine a woman arriving at a doorway with an empty container. She asks for milk. The household has some to spare, but not much. Winter is approaching, and everyone is cautious. The request is refused. She protests. Perhaps, she says, the family has plenty. The door closes. Several days later, their youngest child becomes ill. The parents remember the encounter, but they may also remember their own discomfort at refusing her. Believing the woman caused the illness transforms that discomfort into something else. The family is no longer responsible for refusing a struggling neighbor. They are victims of retaliation. Once a reputation for witchcraft began forming, people sometimes interpreted even ordinary behavior as threatening. If the suspected person stared at someone in the market, the look could be remembered later as an evil eye. If she muttered while walking away from an argument, the words could become a curse. If she touched an animal shortly before it became ill, the touch became significant. If she appeared near a house where something unfortunate happened, her presence might be remembered long afterward. Coincidences accumulated until they seemed impossible to dismiss. Walk through the village later that afternoon, and the change becomes visible. Children who once passed freely near the suspected woman's home are called closer by their parents. A conversation stops when she enters a shop or approaches a market stall. Someone who normally greets her looks down instead. Another person makes a protective gesture after she passes. No one needs to explain what is happening. Reputation works precisely because a community shares information without needing formal announcements. For the person being suspected, the situation could become impossible to manage. If she confronted the rumors angrily, her anger might be considered evidence of a dangerous temper. If she threatened legal action or demanded an apology, the threat might later be remembered as another curse. If she withdrew from neighbors, isolation appears suspicious. If she continued visiting people normally, those visits could be interpreted as attempts to harm them. Even generosity might be viewed with caution. Once the idea of witchcraft became attached to someone, nearly every action could be interpreted through it. Certain physical characteristics or behaviors might also attract attention, although they were rarely enough on their own to create an accusation. Age, disability, unusual scars, mental illness, eccentricity, or simply behaving outside local expectations could contribute to reputation. Later investigators sometimes searched accused people for supposed witches' marks and usual blemishes, moles, scars, or insensitive areas believed in some traditions to indicate a connection with the devil. Human bodies naturally contained countless marks, making such searches capable of finding evidence almost anywhere if investigators were determined enough. The social expectations placed upon women could make accusation especially dangerous. Early modern communities often valued obedience, modesty, religious conformity, and proper behavior within household and neighborhood relationships. A woman known for public arguments, aggressive speech, sexual scandals, or repeated conflict could find herself judged not only for individual actions, but for failing to behave as others believed she should. This did not mean outspoken women or became witches. Most did not. But an existing reputation for disorder could make later accusations easier to believe. Religious reputation mattered too. Attendance at worship, participation in community religious life, and perceived moral behavior could influence how neighbors viewed someone. Yet religious conformity offered no complete protection. People who considered themselves faithful Christians were accused throughout the witch hunt period. Sometimes the accusation itself redefined their entire past. A prayer that once seemed sincere became hypocrisy. Knowledge of Scripture became suspicious if the accused was thought to twist sacred words into charms. A person could discover that years of ordinary life were being reinterpreted as evidence of secret evil. By evening, the suspected woman returns home. The village road is quieter now. Smoke hangs low between the buildings as fires are prepared. Pour the night. She passes a group standing near a doorway, and their conversation stops. She hears only a few words before they look away. Inside her house, she closes the door and lights a candle. The room appears exactly as it did the night before. The same table, the same wooden chest, the same hanging herbs, the same marks in the beams. Yet the world outside has shifted elsewhere. The sick child has worsened. The family has begun discussing whether someone should speak to a local official. A neighbor says there is no harm in asking questions. Another insists that something must be done before another child becomes ill. Someone remembers a previous death that had never been explained. Another person has heard that a nearby town recently arrested a woman for witchcraft after similar events. This is the moment when rumor approaches authority. Until now, everything has remained inside the village. Arguments, stories, memories, fears, and whispered accusations. But once a complaint reaches a magistrate, minister, priest, local court, or other official, the nature of the situation changes. Words spoken beside a well can be recorded. Stories become testimony. Old disagreements become evidence. The accused person's reputation may suddenly be examined by people with the power to imprison, interrogate, and punish. Sometimes officials were skeptical and refused to proceed. Some demanded stronger evidence than neighbors could provide. Not every accusation became a trial, and not every trial ended in conviction. But in places and periods where authorities were already concerned about witchcraft, the arrival of several frightened neighbors could be enough to begin an investigation. Night settles over the village. The road outside the suspected woman's house is empty now, but the silence does not mean the rumors have stopped. Behind closed doors, people continue talking. A candle burns in the home of the sick child, while relatives decide what should happen in the morning. Perhaps 2 or 3 neighbors will go together. Each has a story. None seems decisive on its own, but together they sound convincing. The woman whose name they intend to give is only a short distance away. She may be sleeping by the time the decision is made. She may believe the argument from several days earlier has already been forgotten. But before sunrise, someone may be walking toward the home of a local official. And once that door opens, suspicion will no longer belong only to the village. Chapter 7: Rumors, Quarrels, and Accusations. The village is still grey with morning when 3 people leave their homes and begin walking together along the road. Their boots press into damp earth. One carries a cloak tightly around her shoulders. Another keeps glancing toward the houses behind them, as though expecting someone to appear at a doorway. They are not carrying weapons. They are not an angry mob. They are neighbors going to speak with an official, and each of them believe they have something important to say. The first tells of a sick child. The second remembers a cow that died the previous winter. The third describes an argument that occurred years ago and a threat that seemed meaningless at the time. Separately, these stories might sound like the ordinary troubles of village life. Together, they begin to form something more dangerous. They form a pattern, and the name at the center of that pattern belongs to the same woman. This is the point where rumor can begin turning into evidence. Early, modern witchcraft accusations often emerged from relationships that had been strained long before anyone approached a court. Neighbors fought over food, grazing rights, debts, property boundaries, inheritance, livestock, insults, and access to shared resources. Families remembered grievances. Communities contained friendships and rivalries stretching across generations. Witchcraft did not create these tensions. It gave some of them a supernatural explanation. A magistrate hearing a complaint might therefore receive a story that began years earlier. A witness could describe the first quarrel, then another disagreement, then a series of misfortunes that followed. The chronology mattered. The accusation became persuasive, because each event seemed to confirm the one before it. The official listens. Perhaps the room is part of a larger house. Perhaps it belongs to a local court. Papers lie across a wooden table, and somewhere nearby, a clerk prepares to record what is said. Light enters through a small window. The witnesses stand together, uncomfortable but determined. One begins with the child. She explains that several days after refusing the accused woman bread, the girl became feverish and began behaving strangely. She describes sleepless nights and sudden cries. She repeats the angry words spoken in the doorway. Then another witness speaks. His cow died after an argument with the same woman. A third remembers that years ago a horse became lame shortly after she passed the stable. The official may ask questions. When did this happen? Who heard the threat? Who else was present? Had anyone suspected this woman before? That last question can change everything, because once people are invited to remember suspicious incidents, stories begin emerging from places where they had rested, quietly for years. Word that complaints have been made travels back toward the village before any formal decision is reached. Someone sees the witnesses returning. Someone asks where they have been. A servant overhears part of a conversation. By midday, people who were not involved in the original dispute know that authorities are asking questions. Rumor accelerates a woman says she always knew something was wrong at a workshop. Someone remembers that the accused once predicted bad weather near the churchyard. Another person recalls an illness from 10 years earlier. A story becomes stronger simply because more people are telling it. This does not mean witnesses were always lying. Many undoubtedly believed what they said. That is what makes the process so important to understand. A person could sincerely reinterpret an old memory after hearing that others had experienced something similar. Events that once seemed unrelated became connected by a new explanation. Memory does not remain perfectly preserved. It changes as stories are repeated. A sentence becomes sharper. A glance becomes longer. A vague warning becomes a curse. An ordinary visit becomes an intrusion. Years later, a witness may remember the event with complete confidence. The village slowly constructs a shared history in which the accused person has always been dangerous. Walk along the road that afternoon, and you can hear pieces of that history forming around you. Two people speak beside a fence. until footsteps approach. Then their voices drop. Children repeat fragments they have overheard without fully understanding them. An older man insists that nothing good ever happened after the woman entered his yard. Someone else disagrees and says she once helped his wife during an illness. Another person warns him not to defend her too loudly. Fear begins changing social behavior. People who once spoke freely with the accused may avoid being seen near her. Someone who owes her money might suddenly become difficult to find. Friends become cautious. Relatives may continue defending her. But even family members can wonder whether the accusations contain some truth. The suspected woman notices all of this. She walks toward the well carrying an empty bucket and finds two neighbors already there. Their conversation stops as she approaches. One lifts her water and leaves without waiting. The other keeps her eyes on the rope. The woman asks what is happening. The answer is vague. Nothing. She asks again. This time she hears that people have been speaking to a magistrate. Perhaps she immediately understands why. Perhaps she cannot imagine what she is accused of. Either reaction can look suspicious to someone already convinced of her guilt. If she becomes frightened, people may say she knows she has been discovered. If she becomes angry, they may say her true nature is showing. If she laughs, the laughter appears unnatural. The accusation has begun, creating a world in which innocence is increasingly difficult to perform. Formal complaints varied greatly across Europe. There was no single procedure followed everywhere. Local courts operated under different legal traditions, and standards of evidence changed between regions and centuries. Some authorities were highly skeptical of witchcraft cases. Others were willing to proceed on testimony that would seem extraordinarily weak today. In certain places, a reputation for witchcraft combined with multiple accusations of harmful acts could be enough to justify arrest or further examination. Where prosecution moved forward, witnesses could provide depositions describing specific incidents of alleged malevolence. These statements often preserve the texture of ordinary conflict with remarkable details. Requests denied, insults exchanged, animals becoming sick, children suffering, food spoiling, and threats remembered afterwards. The great witch hunts were built from stories like these, not only from grand theories about Satan, not only from books written by Demino, Logist, STS, but from damaged friendships, dead livestock, sick children, and years of resentment carried into a courtroom. Sometimes, accusations spread beyond the person originally suspected. A witness might mention a relative. Someone might say the accused had learned her practices from her mother. Another claimed she spent time with a woman from a neighboring village already known for witchcraft. Social connections themselves became suspicious. Certain families could acquire reputations that lasted for decades. A mother accused of witchcraft might make future accusations against her daughter easier to believe. A child who grew up hearing that a grandmother had been feared could later find those stories repeated in court. In some communities, witchcraft became almost hereditary in popular imagination. Even though there was no actual inherited magical power behind the accusations, the village landscape begins to look different once suspicion spreads. The cottage at the edge of the road is no longer simply a cottage. The path leading to it becomes a place people avoid after dark. The arbs hanging beneath the roof are no longer ordinary household plants. The cat near the doorway attracts attention. Smoke rising from the chimney seems somehow more noticeable than the smoke above every other house. Nothing physical has changed, only interpretation. That is one of the most unsettling features of the witch hunts. The world did not need to become strange. People only needed to begin looking at ordinary things differently. By late afternoon, the church bell sounds again. People move between fields and homes beneath a sky beginning to darken. The accused woman remains inside. Perhaps a relative has come to warn her. Perhaps someone suggests she'll leave the village for a time. Leaving presents its own danger if she disappears. People may say she fled because she was guilty. If she remains, authorities may come for her. In some cases, suspected people attempted to bring legal action against those spreading accusations, treating claims of witchcraft as slander. This could work, particularly where authorities were skeptical. But once formal prosecution had begun, control increasingly passed away from the accused and into the hands of officials. And officials did not necessarily ask the same questions as frightened neighbors. The neighbors wanted to know why their cow died. The court might want to know how the magic was performed. The neighbors remembered a curse. An interrogator might ask about the devil. The neighbors suspected one person. Authorities influenced by demonological ideas might suspect a network. The accusation was about to become larger than the original quarrel. That evening, several men approach the woman's house. The fading light catches the wet surface of the road as they move between the buildings. One carries a lantern, even though darkness has not completely arrived. Another carries a document or message from the local authority. People notice doors open slightly. Faces appear at windows. Now, one needs to ask where the men are going. They stop outside the house everyone has been discussing for a moment. There is only the sound of an animal moving in a nearby enclosure and the faint crackle of a hearth behind the wall. Then someone knocks inside. Footsteps cross the floor. The door opens. The exchange may be quiet. There is no need for shouting. The woman is told that accusations have been made and that she must answer questions. Depending upon the place and circumstances, she may be ordered to appear later, taken into custody immediately, or subjected first to further investigation. Behind the officials, several neighbors are watching from a distance. Some may feel relief, others uncertainty. One may already regret how far the story has gone. But the accusation no longer belongs to them. It has entered the machinery of law. The woman looks once toward the houses around her before leaving. These are the same homes she has seen every morning for years. The same road, the same well, the same church tower darkening against the evening sky. Yet, tonight, almost every familiar face seems to be watching her as she is led away the village. Big is talking again. Some say justice is finally being done. Some wonder what she will confess. Others quietly insist that the whole thing has gone too far, but somewhere ahead. A rune is waiting. There will be questions, there will be witnesses, and the officials who ask those questions may believe they are no longer investigating a simple quarrel between neighbors. They may believe they are beginning to uncover the work of the devil himself. Chapter 8. The Devil enters the story. The room is colder than the house she left behind. Stone holds the chill long after the sun has risen, and the small window high in the wall admits only a narrow wash of grey light. Somewhere beyond, the door. Footsteps pass along a corridor and fade away. A candle burns on the table before her, its flame leaning whenever a draught reaches the room. Across from her sit men who have heard the accusations from the village. They know about the sick child. They know about the dead cow. They know about the quarrel at the doorway. But the questions they are preparing to ask belong to a much larger story. The villagers had accused her of causing harm. The authorities may now ask whether she has met the devil. This shift from harmful neighborhood magic to a conspiracy involving Satan was one of the most important developments in the history of the European witch hunts. For centuries, Christian authorities had condemned sorcery and magical practices in many forms. But during the later Middle Ages and early modern period, some theologians, lawyers, and demonological writers developed a far more threatening idea. The witch was not simply someone who performed forbidden magic. The witch had willingly joined the enemies of God. According to this developing theory, magical power ultimately came from demons. A human being could not truly command supernatural forces independently. If a witch appeared able to cause illness, raise storms, destroy crops, or harm animals, then demonic assistance must lie behind those acts. The magic, therefore, became evidence of something deeper, an agreement between the witch and the devil. That agreement was commonly described as a pact. The details differed from one writer to another, but the basic idea was simple and terrifying. That the witch renounced Christian faith, promised loyalty to Satan, and in return received the ability to perform harmful acts. Some accounts described the devil appearing in human form. Others gave him animal features, or portrayed him as a dark, distorted figure. He might offer wealth, revenge, sexual pleasure, or supernatural power. The accused person was then said to seal the agreement through words, touch, ritual, or some physical mark upon the body. To the officials sitting across the table, this could make perfect theological sense, but to the prisoner, it might be completely unfamiliar. The questioning begins. When did you first meet him? She says she never did. Where did he appear? Nowhere. What did he promise you? Nothing. Who was present when you made the pact? No one. Each denial may simply produce another question. The investigators are not necessarily pretending. Many genuinely believe the answers exist. Their task, as they understand it, is to uncover them. This is where learned demonology could reshape a local accusation. A neighbor might never have claimed to see Satan. The original complaint may contain nothing about secret rituals or demonic agreements. Yet once the accusation enters a legal or religious system influenced by these ideas, the questions change. Authorities begin asking not merely what happened, but how witchcraft itself works. The answers expected by the court may already exist in books. One of the most influential was the Melius Maleficarum, often translated as the Hammer of Witches, first published in the late 15th century. It was not the single rule book of the European witch hunts, and it did not control every prosecution. Its influence varied, and many authorities never relied upon it. But it became one famous example of a wider demonological literature describing witches as servants of the devil, and presenting methods for identifying and prosecuting them. Other writers produced their own treatises. Clergy preached about the dangers of Satan. Lawyers debated evidence. Judges exchanged accounts of trials. Printing allowed ideas that once circulated slowly in manuscripts to travel more widely through Europe. The image of the witch grew increasingly elaborate. There was the pact, then came the Sabbath. Writers described secret gatherings where witches supposedly met at night. According to some accounts, they traveled there through magical flight. At the gathering, they might feast, dance, perform rituals, worship the devil, mock Christian ceremonies, or plan harm against their neighbors. Later, artistic and literary traditions would turn these alleged meetings into vivid scenes filled with fires, demons, strange animals, and crowds of witches. But the historical reality is very different. There is no evidence that vast organized societies of Satan-worshipping witches were meeting secretly across early modern Europe in the form described by The Sabbath was largely a construction assembled from older folklore, theological fears, interrogations, accusations, and expectations about what witches were supposed to do. Yet once authorities believed such meetings existed, they began asking prison about them, and questions have power. Imagine sitting in that cold room while an officio describes an event you insist never happened. Were you carried through the air? No dot who accompanied you. No one. What did the devil look like? I never saw him. Where did the meeting take place? There was no meeting. But the questioning continues, perhaps for hours, perhaps across several sessions. If pressure intensifies, a prisoner may begin trying to understand what answers will satisfy the people asking. The interrogator mentions a black dog. Later, the accused remembers a dog. The interrogator asks about a gathering in the woods. Eventually, the prisoner describes one. This does not mean every confession was produced in exactly this way. Some accused people developed extraordinary narratives themselves. Others drew upon beliefs they already knew from sermons, rumors, folklore, or previous trials. Some confessed voluntarily for reasons that remained difficult to reconstruct. But coercive questioning could unquestionably shape what prisoners said in jurisdictions where torture was permitted. The danger became far greater. The goal of torture was often confession. Under some legal systems, especially where certain standards of proof had to be met before conviction, a confession could carry enormous importance. Officers might believe that physical coercion was a legitimate means of forcing truth from a stubborn suspect. But extreme pain does not reliably produce truth. It produces answers, and when investigators already know what those answers are supposed to sound like, the resulting confession can begin to mirror the questions. The devil appeared. A pact was made. A gathering took place. Other witches were there. Names were given. The machinery expands. The idea of the Sabbath was especially dangerous, because it transformed witchcraft from an individual crime into a collective one. If witches gathered together, then every confessed, which became a potential source of new suspects. Authorities no longer needed to wait for another dead cow or sick child. They could simply ask who else had attended the meeting. One name leads to another dot, then another. Imagine a map of neighboring villagers spread across a table. At first, there is a single mark, one accused woman. After interrogation, 3 more names are added. Those people live in different settlements. They're arrested and questioned. Each produces additional names. Soon the marks spread along roads and across parish boundaries. This was one-way local witchcraft. Cases could become regional panics. The devil also made the crime of witchcraft seem much more severe. Harmful magic might destroy property or kill an animal. A demonic pact threatened the entire religious and social order. The witch was now imagined as an apostate person who'd abandoned God and secretly allied with humanity's spiritual enemy. That made ordinary evidence appear more ominous. A charm was no longer merely a charm. It might be a tool provided by a demon. A strange animal might be a familiar spirit. An unusual mark on the body might be evidence of Satan's touch. A nighttime gathering of neighbors might become a witch's meeting. Even sexuality entered some demonological account, with writers describing supposed relations between witches and demons. These claims reveal as much about the fears and obsessions of the writers as they do about the people being accused. Gender shaped many of these ideas. Some influential authors argued that women were especially vulnerable to demonic temptation because they believed women were weaker, more carnal, more deceptive, or less intellectually disciplined than men. Such claims reflected deeply rooted prejudices within early modern society. They helped give theological justification to patterns of accusation that already fell disproportionately upon women in many parts of Europe. Yet the stereotype never became universal. Men were prosecuted in significant numbers in several regions, and the gender balance varied sharply from place to place. Witch hunting was never one identical phenomenon spread evenly across Europe, outside the interrogation chamber. The village hears only fragments of what is happening. Someone says the prisoner has confessed. Another says she has named 3 others. Someone insists the devil appeared to her as a black animal. The story may be inaccurate before it has even reached the end of the road. By evening, details have multiplied. People who originally accused the woman of harming a child may now hear that she attended secret meetings for years. The scale of the danger changes in their minds. They believed there was one witch living among them. Now they are told there may be many. Night falls differently after such a rumor, but the same paths lie between the houses. The same trees stand beyond the fields. The church tower remains above the rooftops, but darkness seems to contain more possibilities than it did before. A dog moving between buildings attracts a second glance. A light seen far across a field raises questions. Someone returning late from another village is asked where they have been. 2 women meeting quietly. Near house may become the subject of conversation the following morning. Fear teaches people to look for what they expect to find. Back in the interrogation room, the candle has burned much lower. Wax has collected along its side and pooled near. At base, the accused woman is tired. The officials are not finished. They ask again about the devil. They ask again about the gathering. Then comes the question that may determine whether this remains one case or becomes something much larger. Who else was there? The room is silent. Outside, somewhere beyond the stone walls, a bell marks the hour. The woman knows the names of dozens of people in her village, neighbors, relatives, friends, enemies, people who have already spoken against her. One name may be enough to continue the investigation, and if that name is spoken, another door may soon receive a knock in the night. Chapter 9. The Arrest and Investigation. The knock comes before sunrise. For a few seconds, nothing inside the house moves. Then there is another knock, harder this time, followed by voices outside the door. A fire has not yet been lit. The room is cold and nearly dark, with only a faint grey light beginning to show through the shutters. Someone inside rises from a bed of straw and wool. Bare feet cross the floor. A child wakes and begins asking what is happening. The knocking comes again when the door opens. Several men are waiting in the road. They may be local constables, officers, acting for a magistrate, or other representatives of the court. The exact procedure differs from one territory to another, but their purpose is clear. An accusation has become an investigation, and the person standing in the doorway is no longer merely the subject of village gossip. She is now a suspect. The officials may explain that complaints have been made against her. They may mention witchcraft directly, or they may simply say that she must come before a magistrate to answer questions. In some cases, the accused might be summoned rather than seized immediately. In others, especially during periods of intense witch hunting, arrest could come quickly. There is little time to prepare. A cloak is pulled around the shoulders. Shoes are found. Perhaps a husband or child protests. Perhaps neighbors have already opened their doors and are watching from a distance. The village that was silent moments earlier begins stirring as word spreads from house to house. They have come for her. As she steps outside, the morning air is damp and cold. Smoke has not yet begun rising from most of the chimneys. The church tower stands dark against the pale sky. She knows every house along the road, but this morning the familiar village feels strangely exposed. Curtains and shutters move. Faces appear and disappear. The walk toward questioning may be short, perhaps only to a nearby official's house or local court. In other cases, the accused might be taken to a town several miles away. The road passes through fields beginning to emerge from the darkness. Birds call from hedges. A cart approaches from the opposite direction and slows when the driver recognizes a small group. Everyone looks. Reputation has now become public. Once an accusation entered the legal system, authorities tried to determine whether the stories told by neighbors justified further action. There was no universal European procedure for investigating witchcraft. Courts operated according to different laws, customs, and standards of evidence. Some places used legal systems in which judges played an active role in gathering and testing evidence. Elsewhere, accusations developed through other forms of local prosecution. The willingness of authorities to believe. Witnesses also varied dramatically. Some officials dismissed weak cases. Others became deeply involved. During the worst witch panics, the investigators themselves could become convinced that a hidden conspiracy was spreading through the region. The first stage might involve collecting testimony. Witnesses are called one by one. They describe what happened. A farmer says the accused woman came to his house asking for food. He refused. She left angry. 3 days later, his cow died. Another witness describes a child's illness. A third remembers an argument from years earlier. These statements may be written down by a clerk. Listening to surviving depositions today can feel remarkably intimate, because they preserve details of ordinary life that otherwise might have disappeared completely. Who borrowed a bowl? Who asked for milk? Who stood beside a doorway? Who spoke harshly at a market stall? The court is building a chronology. The accused. Woman sat at one end of a village quarrel. Misfortune occurred. Afterward, now, the investigators want to know whether there is enough evidence to connect them. The problem is that much of the evidence in witchcraft cases involved events that could not actually prove witchcraft had occurred. A sick animal could not explain what caused its illness. A frightened witness could honestly believe they had been cursed without possessing any way to demonstrate it. Yet when several people described similar experiences, officials might see repetition as confirmation. The accused person could also be questioned about her reputation. How long had people called her a witch? Had anyone previously accused her? Did she know charms? Could she heal animals? Had she ever threatened someone? Had she predicted a death? A lifetime of ordinary conversations could suddenly become relevant. The investigation might then move into the suspect's home. Imagine officials entering the house she left earlier that morning. Daylight now falls across the room. They examine shelves, chests, bedding, the hearth, perhaps containers holding herbs or medicines. Most of what they find is entirely normal. Household tools, food, clothing, thread, cooking vessels, dried plants. But investigators who expect to find evidence may interpret ordinary possessions differently. Herbs become possible magical ingredients. Written charm becomes suspicious. An unusual object hidden near the hearth attracts attention. If the accused has practiced folk healing, the materials she once used openly may now be collected as evidence against her in some regions and periods. Authorities also searched for physical evidence upon the accused person herself. One notorious practice involved searching the body for a supposed witch's mark or devil's mark. Demonological theory sometimes claimed that the devil marked those who entered his service. Other traditions focused upon an unusual spot believed to feed a familiar spirit. The accused might be stripped and examined. Moles, scars, birthmarks, skin tags, or other ordinary features could attract attention. In some places, searchers tested suspicious areas with pins or sharp instruments, believing that an insensitive spot might reveal a supernatural mark. The problem is obvious to a modern observer. Human bodies contain scars and irregularities. Skin sensitivity varies. Fear, exhaustion, and poor testing methods make such examinations unreliable. And specialized witchpickers eventually emerged in some regions, claiming expertise in locating these marks. The more determined the search, the more likely some feature would be interpreted as suspicious for the prisoner. The experience could be humiliating as well as terrifying. She stands in a cold room, while strangers inspect her body for proof of a crime that may never have occurred. Every mark becomes something she may be required to explain. That scar, A childhood injury. That mole. It has always been there. That patch of skin. She does not know. But the investigators are not simply asking what the marks are. They are asking what the marks mean. Other tests grew from folk beliefs rather than formal legal evidence. One of the most famous was swimming or ducking an accused witch. The idea, in some traditions, was that water, sometimes understood symbolically through baptism, would reject a witch. The accused might be bound and lowered into water. Floating could be treated as suspicious. This was not used everywhere, and it should not be imagined as a standard procedure throughout the witch-hunting world. Many legal authorities criticized such tests, but where they were used, they created another almost impossible situation in which an ordinary physical outcome could become supernatural evidence. The investigation might also turn toward objects associated with familiars. If witnesses claimed the accused kept a strange animal, officials might ask about pets or creatures seen near the house. Did she own a cat? Did a dog visit regularly? Had anyone seen a toad? Did something crawl from beneath a bed? Ordinary animals could become attached to elaborate stories once the idea of familiar spirits entered the case. A mouse in the wall becomes more than a mouse. A cat that follows its owner becomes an assistant. A dog appearing at the doorway after dark becomes something sent by the devil. Again, interpretation transforms the ordinary world. Meanwhile, the accused remains confined. Early modern imprisonment could itself be a severe ordeal even before any sentence was passed. Cells were often cold, crowded, dirty, and poorly ventilated. Food might be limited, sometimes depending upon relatives, poor the prisoner's own resources. Bedding could consist of straw. Sanitation was minimal. Listen for a moment to the space around the prisoner. Water drips somewhere beyond the wall. Keys strike metal. Footsteps approach and then pass. Another prisoner coughs in the darkness. A thin strip of daylight slowly moves across the floor as morning becomes afternoon. Hours pass with very little information. Outside, witnesses are talking about her life. Inside, she waits. Isolation and uncertainty placed enormous psychological pressure upon accused people. They might not know exactly what neighbors had claimed. They might not know when questioning would resume. They might worry about children left at home, animals, unattended income lost, or relatives who would now share the stigma of accusation. Then the door opens again. More questions. The interrogators may return, repeatedly to the same incidents, looking for contradictions. Why did you visit that house? Why did you become angry? What exactly did you say? Why did the cow die afterward? Did you touch the child? Did you know she would become sick? The accused can answer the first question. Visited because she needed bread. She became angry because she was refused. She cannot answer the question that matters most. Why did the cow die? She does not know. To the investigators. Uncertainty may sound evasive. The questioning begins moving beyond the original accusations. Do you know any witches? Have you ever used charms? Have you spoken with spirits? Have you seen the devil? Did you attend a gathering at night? The world described by the officials grows larger with each question. If the accused denies everything, authorities must decide whether they believe her. If she admits knowing a charm, the admission may be used to support other accusations. If she confesses to one small practice, Investigators may press for something larger, and if another prisoner has already named her as a companion at a witches' gathering, denial becomes more difficult still. This was one of the most dangerous features of expanding witch hunts. Evidence could begin circulating between cases. One prisoner named another. The second person's arrest seemed to confirm the first confession. If the second then named a third, the network grew stronger in the minds of investigators. The accusation became self-supporting. By evening, the villagers heard that the search uncovered suspicious objects. No one agrees on what those objects were. Someone says a book was found. Another says there were bones. Someone insists an animal was discovered hidden inside the house. None of these stories may be true. Rumor no longer waits for facts at the village. Well, the accused woman's absence feels almost physical. Her house stands closed. No smoke rises from it. People glance toward the doorway as they pass. Some are convinced she is guilty. Others remain uncertain. A few may quietly fear that their own names could appear next, because an investigation into witchcraft rarely asks only what one person had done. It asks who taught them, who helped them, who met with them, who else belongs to the same hidden world. Night falls over the place where the prisoner is being held. The last daylight disappears from the narrow window. Somewhere outside, bells mark the hour. Tomorrow she may face witnesses. She may hear the accusations read aloud. She may be questioned again, and depending upon the court, the evidence, and the people judging her, the investigation may now move towards something far more formal. A witch trial. Chapter 10. Inside a witch trial. The courtroom is already occupied when the prisoner is brought inside. Morning light enters through narrow windows, but much of the room remains in shadow. Wooden benches line the walls. Papers rest on a table. Before the officials who will hear the case. A clerk prepares ink and begins arranging earlier statements. Somewhere behind the prisoner, people whisper until they are told to be quiet. Some of them are neighbors she has known for years. Others have come simply because a witchcraft trial is something worth seeing. There was no single courtroom procedure used throughout Europe. Witchcraft cases unfolded under different legal systems, and those differences could determine whether an accusation ended quickly or grew into a major prosecution. Some courts demanded substantial evidence and treated supernatural claims cautiously. Others allowed reputation, confession, testimony about curses, or accusations from other prisoners to carry far greater weight. In some territories, professional judges directed investigations. Elsewhere, local officials and community institutions played larger roles. What happened to an accused person could depend as much upon geography as upon the accusation itself, for the prisoner standing before the court. These distinctions matter enormously, though she may understand very little about them. What she sees are familiar faces. The farmer whose cow died is waiting to speak. The mother of the sick child sits nearby. Another woman avoids looking directly at her. The village quarrels that once happened beside doorways and wells have entered a room where every word can now be written down and preserved as testimony. A witness is called first. He describes an argument that took place several months earlier. The accused woman asked for food. He refused. She became angry and said something threatening as she left. Several days later, one of his animals became sick. He tells the court that he believes she bewitched it. The clerk records the account. Then another witness speaks about an unexplained illness. Another describes milk that would no longer churn properly. Someone else remembers a strange pain that began after meeting the accused on the road to modern ears. The evidence sounds painfully uncertain. No one saw magic being performed. No one can prove that a curse caused an animal to die. Yet the witnesses are not necessarily pretending. Many may be describing events exactly as they believe they happened. That sincerity could make the accusation more persuasive. Several respectable neighbors telling similar stories created the appearance of a pattern, and a pattern could become powerful in a court already willing to believe witchcraft was possible. The prisoner is asked to answer. She remembers the argument, but denies making a curse. She did ask for food. She was angry when it was refused. She may even admit saying the family would regret their behavior. But she insists she had nothing to do with the dead animal. How could she explain why it became sick? She cannot. No one can. The absence of an explanation leaves room for the accusation to remain. Then another witness describes something more unusual. Perhaps she claims to have seen the accused standing near her bed during an illness, even though the door was locked. Perhaps she dreamed of being attacked and later recognized the accused woman's face. In some witchcraft cases, witnesses described spectral or supernatural experiences that they believed were genuine. Courts differed greatly over whether such testimony should be accepted. The problem was obvious even to some early modern judges. If the devil could create illusions or take another person's appearance, how could anyone know that the accused was responsible for what a witness claimed to see? Not every authority was credulous. Skepticism existed throughout the witch-hunting period. Judges questioned unreliable accusations. Clergy warned against excessive prosecutions. Legal writers criticized methods that seemed certain to produce false confession. Some courts demanded evidence that was difficult for prosecutors to provide. Areas with strong procedural protections often experienced fewer executions than neighboring territories, where investigations were more aggressive. But in a court already convinced that witches were active, uncertainty could work against the prisoner. Officials began asking about her knowledge of charms. Someone testified that she once cured a sick animal. Did she perform magic? She says she used herbs and prayed. Where did she learn the remedy? From her mother. Did her mother practice witchcraft? No. Did she speak special words? Perhaps. What words? She cannot remember exactly. The questions narrow around her. A practice that had once been considered useful now sounds suspicious when repeated aloud in court. The trial may also include testimony about reputation. Witnesses say she has long been called a witch. One claims his parents warned him about her when he was a child. Another says people have feared her for 20 years. Such evidence could create an extraordinary problem. Reputation was partly created by accusations, yet the existence of that reputation could then be offered as support for new accusation. Suspicion became evidence of itself. From the benches comes the rustle of clothing as another witness rises. The prisoner recognizes her immediately. They once worked beside each other during harvest. Their children played together years ago. Now the woman tells the court that she remembers the accused making a strange prediction before her husband became ill. The prisoner interrupts. That is not what happened. An official orders her to remain silent until she is addressed. The room feels smaller now. The familiar faces are still there, but every relationship has changed. A neighbor is no longer a neighbor. She is a witness. An old disagreement is no longer gossip. It is testimony. A sentence spoken 10 years earlier has become evident in a capitate sum, which trials allowed the accused meaningful opportunities to challenge witnesses or present a defense. Others offered far fewer protections than a modern defendant would expect. Legal representation was inconsistent, and proceedings could be heavily weighted toward discovering guilt rather than testing innocence. Procedures varied enough that it is misleading to imagine one universal witch trial. But in the most dangerous systems, the accused entered a process designed to obtain confession and expose accomplices. Confession carried enormous importance. If the accused admitted using harmful magic, the court could move closer to conviction. If she admitted making a pact with the devil, demonological theories seemed confirmed. If she named other witches, the investigation expanded. The prisoner therefore faces repeated demands to confess. Tell the truth. Admit what you have done. Name those who were with you. Confession may even be presented as spiritually beneficial, if execution seems likely. Acknowledging guilt and repenting might be described as a final opportunity to save the soul, even if the body cannot be saved. The court can therefore place religious and legal pressure upon the prisoner at the same time. Some accused people eventually confess without physical torture. Exhaustion, fear, isolation, repeated questioning, religious pressure, mental illness, or the belief that confession might bring mercy could all contribute. Others maintain their innocence until death, and some produce confessions so detailed that they seem almost like stories. They describe meeting the devil on a road. They describe an animal speaking. They describe flying through the night. They describe gatherings filled with people from neighboring villages. Such confessions were sometimes treated as astonishing, proof that demonologists had been correct all along. Yet the details frequently resembled the questions investigators were already asking and the stories circulating through contemporary culture. The accused lived in the same world of beliefs as their interrogators. They knew what witches were supposed to do. As the hearing continues, the air in the room grows warmer despite the cold outside. Candles have burned lower. The clerk's fingers are stained with ink. Witnesses shift on wooden benches after hours of waiting. Someone opens a door briefly, and cold air enters along with the distant sounds of the street. Outside, merchants are selling food. Horses pull carts past the building. People who have no interest in the trial continue their day only a short distance away. Inside, another document is produced. The accused woman has been named by a prisoner from another village. That prisoner claims they attended a witch's. Gathering together, the two women may barely know one another. Perhaps they met once at a market. Perhaps they are relatives. Perhaps they have never met at all. But the accusation creates a new problem. The court is no longer considering only whether she cursed a neighbor's cow. It is considering whether she belongs to a larger conspiracy. The officials ask where the gathering occurred. She says there was no gathering. Who else attended? No one did she see the devil there. No. The denial returns them to the same place they began. If the judges believe her, the case may weaken. If they believe the witnesses, her refusal becomes stubbornness, and in some jurisdictions, stubbornness could lead to the next stage of investigation. Coercion. European legal systems placed different restrictions upon torture, and many witchcraft trials involved none at all. England, for example, did not use judicial torture routinely in ordinary witchcraft prosecutions in the same way it was employed in some continental territory. Elsewhere, particularly within certain inquisitorial legal systems, torture could be authorized when judges believed strong evidence existed but lacked the confession required for conviction. Rules might supposedly limit its use. In practice, those rules could be stretched. A prisoner might be deprived of sleep, kept in painful restraints, questioned repeatedly, subjected to physical torture, then questioned again afterward. Technically, separate sessions could allow authorities to claim that torture had not simply been repeated without limit. Where the methods became aggressive, confession rates could rise dramatically. So could the number of accused witches, because the question was rarely only, "Are you guilty?" It was also, "Who else is guilty?" Evening light has nearly disappeared by the time the day's proceedings end. The witnesses leave first, stepping into the cold air outside and immediately beginning to discuss what they heard. By the time some of them reach the village, the story will already have changed. Someone will say the prisoner nearly confessed. Someone else will insist she admitted knowing spells. Another will claim several new witches have been identified. The prisoner does not return with them. She is led back through another doorway and along a corridor toward confinement. The sound of the courtroom fades behind her. Keys turn. A heavy door closes. She may still have another. Hearing ahead. More witnesses may be found. More questions may be asked. But the trial has now revealed the problem at the center of many witchcraft. Prosarchins, a crime being investigated as invisible. The alleged act leaves no unmistakable physical evidence. Almost everything depends upon testimony, confession, interpretation, and belief. And when belief is strong enough, the court may decide that denial is not evidence of innocence. It is simply another obstacle standing between the investigators and the confession they expect to hear. Chapter 11. Confession, Torture, and the fires of Europe's cell is almost completely dark when the prisoner wakes. Pale morning light has only just begun to appear through a narrow opening high in the wall. Straw rustles beneath her. She moves. Somewhere beyond the door, water falls steadily onto stone. A prisoner coughs in another room. Then come footsteps, slow and deliberate, followed by the scrape of a key entering a lock. The door opens. For an accused witch in parts of early modern Europe, this could mark the beginning of the most dangerous stage of the investigation. Witnesses had been heard. Accusations had been written down. Neighbors had described sick children, dead animals, threats, charms, and strange behavior. Another prisoner may already have named her as someone seen at a supposed witches' gathering. Yet the court still wanted something more valuable than rumor or testimony. It wanted confession across Europe. The legal treatment of accused witches varied enormously. There was never one universal process. England generally did not use judicial torture in ordinary witchcraft cases, and normally executed convicted witches by hanging rather than burning. Scotland developed different practices and frequently strangled condemned witches at the stake before burning their bodies. In many territories of the Holy Roman Empire, Switzerland, and other parts of continental Europe, burning became strongly associated with witchcraft executions. Some prisoners were strangled or beheaded before the flames were lit. Others, particularly during severe persecutions, were burned alive. The image of the burning, which therefore belongs very much to European history, though not everywhere in exactly the same way, for now the prisoner is still alive. She is led through a passage into another room. You follow at a distance, close enough to hear the movement of chains and the low voices of officials. The room is colder than the corridor. Candles burn on a table even though daylight has arrived, because the windows admit so little of it. A clerk sits ready to record whatever is said. The officials ask the same questions they asked before. Will you confess? She says there is nothing to confess. Did you meet the devil? No. Did you renounce God? No. Who attended the gathering with you? There was no gathering. In some continental legal systems, torture could be authorized when judges believed strong evidence already existed but still lacked the confession required for conviction. Rules sometimes claimed to limit how and when it could be used. During intense witch persecutions, those restrictions could become flexible. Sometimes the threat alone was enough. A prisoner could be shown the instruments, told what would happen, or made to hear another person being questioned nearby. Fear itself became part of the interrogation. Others continued denying everything. A prisoner might be restrained, suspended, stretched, compressed, deprived of sleep, or subjected to other forms of physical pressure depending on the place and period. The purpose was supposedly to force truth from someone believed to be withholding it, but pain does not reliably produce truth. It produces answers. The questions continued until the answers began to resemble what the investigators already believed. When did the devil first appear? What form did he take? What did he promise you? Where was the witch's Sabbath? Who else attended? That last question could be the most destructive of all. If witchcraft was understood as a conspiracy, then one accused, which was rarely enough. A confession was expected to contain names, neighbors, relatives, friends, enemies, people the prisoner had known for years. Perhaps even people whose names had already been suggested during questioning. One prisoner named 3. Those 3 named. Others, those new prisoners, produced still more names in some of the most severe persecutions of Central Europe. This process spread through communities with astonishing speed. The territories around Bamberg and Würzburg became infamous during the 17th century, when large numbers of people were prosecuted and executed. Once officials became convinced that hidden networks of witches existed among them, status offered less protection than it had before. Ordinary villagers were accused, but so were prosperous citizens, officials, clergy, and members of established families. A witch hunt could begin feeding itself. The confession expected from a prisoner often followed a recognizable pattern. The devil appeared. A pact was made. The accused traveled to a secret gathering. There was dancing, feasting, blasphemy, or mockery of Christian worship. Other witches were present. Names followed. Too. Officials already familiar with demonological literature. These confessions seemed to confirm everything they feared, but the details frequently reflected the questions. Investigators described the world they believed would be inhabited, and then demanded that prisoners place themselves inside it, under exhaustion, terror, coercion, or torture. Some eventually did. Once that confession was written down, it became evidence for the next case. Outside the prison, townspeople heard only the result. She confessed. The words traveled quickly. People repeated them in markets, kitchens, workshops, and churchyards. Those who had doubted the accusation became quieter. Those who had testified felt vindicated. Others became afraid because the confession supposedly contained more names inside the cell. The prisoner may have hoped confession would bring mercy. It often did not. Authorities could urge the accused to repent, presenting confession as an opportunity to save the soul even if the body could not be saved. A prisoner might be told that admitting guilt and returning to God mattered more now than maintaining innocence. Then the sentence was pronounced death, and in many continental jurisdictions, death by fire. The execution is set for morning. By the time you reach the edge of the town, people are already gathering. The sun is low, and the air carries the damp chill of early morning. Your boots press into trampled earth as you move with the crowd toward an open space beyond the houses. Church bells sound behind you. Their slow rhythm moves over the rooftops and across the fields. Ahead stands the stake. At first, it looks surprisingly ordinary. A thick wooden post rises from the center of the execution ground. Around it, bundles of wood, brush, straw, and other fuel have been arranged. Nearby, officials speak quietly. A clergyman waits. Guards keep an open path through the crowd. People stand shoulder to shoulder around. You hear low conversation. Someone says, "The condemned woman admitter everything." Another insists she named several others. A child asks what is going to happen and is quickly silenced. A merchant moves along the edge of the gathering selling something to eat. The ordinary world has followed everyone. Here, then the crowd changes. Voices lower, heads turn toward the road. The prisoner is coming. She appears between the guards, walking slowly toward the stake. Her clothing is plain. Her hair may be covered or hanging loosely depending upon the place and circumstances. Nothing about her appearance matures the creature imagined in demonological books. She looks human, tired, cold, smaller than the stories told about her. You recognize the strangeness of that contrast immediately. This is the same sort of person who might have carried water from a well, gathered vegetables, argued at a doorway, or stood beside neighbors during Sunday worship. Now, hundreds of eyes follow her toward the woodpile. A priest or minister walks close beside her, speaking words you cannot fully hear from where you stand. Perhaps he urges repentance, Perhaps prayers are being recited. The condemned woman reaches the stake. Officials secure her. The method differs by region. In some places, a rope or chain is fastened around the body. In others, the condemned person may first be strangled at the stake, either as the normal method of execution or as a form of mercy before the fire consumes the body. Elsewhere, the sentence may require the prisoner to face the flames alive. You hear the scrape of wood being moved. A guard checks the bindings. The crowd has become almost completely quiet. For a moment, the loudest sounds are the wind moving across, the open ground and the distant bell from the town behind you. Then someone brings forward a flame. It touches the dry material near the base. At first, very little happens. A few thin strands of smoke rise. Then a small orange flame appears. It travels through straw and dry brush, splitting into several smaller tongues of fire. The wood begins to crackle. Smoke thickens. The first gust carries it sideways through the crowd, and several people turn their faces away. You smell burning straw, damp timber, smoke, and something sharper beneath it. The flames grow. They climb slowly around the lower bundles of wood, disappearing for moments behind. Grey smoke before appearing again farther up. Big peat begins reaching the people standing nearest the execution ground. Some step backward, others lean forward. No one speaks loudly. Now, if the prisoner has already been strangled, the body remains motionless as flames spread through the wood. If she is alive, the scene becomes far harder to witness. Contemporary punishments were intended to be public, and the horror of them was part of their power. They demonstrated what authorities claimed would happen to people who threatened the religious and social order. The fire rises higher. Smoke gathers around the stake until the figure at its center becomes difficult to see. The wind shifts and briefly opens the view. Again that you can see the outline of the post, the dark shape of the body, bright orange fire beneath. Then the smoke closes once more. People near you begin murmuring prayers. Someone crosses themselves. Another person stares silently at the ground, farther back. A child begins crying. The bells continue. Beyond the execution ground, the town remains visible. Smoke from household chimneys rises into the same sky. Somewhere behind those walls, bread is being baked. Animals are being fed. Someone is repairing a wheel. Someone else is opening a shop. That contrast is almost impossible to ignore. One human being is burning while ordinary morning life continues only a short distance away. The fire has now fully taken hold. Wood collapses inward with a sharp crack. Sparks rise above the smoke and disappear into the pale sky. The heat pushes more of the crowd back. You can no longer clearly see the person at the center. Only fire dot smoke dot the black line of the stake. Eventually, there is very little left for the crowd to watch. People begin leaving in small groups. Their conversations start almost immediately. Some say justice has been done. Some discuss the confession. Others repeat the names, supposedly given before death. A few walk away quietly, where They believe the woman was guilty or innocent. They have witnessed something designed never to be forgotten. You will remain for another moment. The fire is still burning behind you as the road back toward town begins filling with people. Smoke drifts above the field. The church tower stands beyond, bit, and somewhere inside one of the houses you are walking toward, another person may already know that their name appeared in the dead woman's confession. Another arrest may come tonight. Another interrogation may begin tomorrow. Another stake may soon be built. This is how the fires of the European witch hunts spread not, because flames moved physically from one town to another, but because accusation produced confession, confession produced names, and names produced new prisoners. One execution could end a life. But during the worst persecutions, it could also begin the next case. Chapter 12, After the Fire. By the following morning, the execution ground is almost empty. The crowd that filled the field yesterday has returned to its homes, workshops, farms, and markets. What remains is quiet. Charred pieces of wood lie collapsed around the blackened stake. Ash has settled into the damp earth. A thin smell of smoke still hangs in the air, weaker now but unmistakable. Crows move across the distant field, and beyond the town wall a church bell marks the beginning of another ordinary day. You stand. For a moment where hundreds of people stood only hours earlier. There is no shouting now, no prayers from the crowd, no crack of burning timber, only wind moving through the grass and the occasional sound of a cart passing along the road behind. Beaut. The woman who was brought here yesterday is gone, but her execution does not end the story. Her absence will now move through the community in quieter ways, through an empty chair, an abandoned house, frightened children, unpaid debts, damaged, poots, reputations, and the names she may have spoken before her death for the family of an executed witch. Life could change immediately. A husband might lose a wife who had contributed essential labor to the household. Children could lose a mother. Parents could lose a daughter. A family already living close to poverty might suddenly have fewer hands available to cook, gather, fuel, tend animals, spin cloth, work fields, sell goods, or care for younger children. Early modern households depended heavily upon shared labor. Removing one adult could destabilize everything. There was also the question of property. Practices differed greatly across Europe. In some jurisdictions, conviction for witchcraft could lead to confiscation of property or financial penalties, while elsewhere families retained more of what they owned. During some notorious persecutions, accusations could become entangled with the seizure of estates, court costs, imprisonment, expenses, and execution fees. A family might therefore suffer not only the loss of a relative, but the loss of money and possessions needed to survive. Imagine returning to the condemned woman's house. The door is closed. The road outside is still damp from recent rain. Inside, the room looks almost exactly as it did before her arrest. A wooden bowl rests on a shelf. Clothing remains folded inside a chest. A bundle of dried plants hangs near the wall. Ash sits beneath the hearth. None of these objects knows that its owner will never return. Perhaps relatives enter to collect. What remains? They move quietly through the room, deciding what can be taken and what must be left. A daughter recognizes a shawl. A son lifts a cooking vessel used throughout his childhood. Someone finds an object that suddenly carries enormous emotional weight simply because the person who touched it every day is dead. Outside. Neighbors notice who enters the house. The stigma of witchcraft did not always die with the accused. Relatives could find themselves watched more closely afterward. If people believed witchcraft could be taught within families, a daughter, sister, or husband might become suspicious simply through association. During expanding hunts, investigators sometimes asked whether magical knowledge had passed from one generation to another. A mother accused of witchcraft could therefore cast a shadow over children who had never been suspected before. This did not happen automatically. Many families continued living in their communities. Some defended the memory of the executed person. Others distanced themselves from the accusation as quickly as possible. The consequences depended heavily upon local circumstances and whether the wider hunt continued. But during a panic, association itself could become dangerous. At the village well, conversations have changed again. Yesterday, everyone discussed the execution. Today, the question is, who comes next? Someone claims the condemned. Woman named for people before she died. Someone else says it was 7 a.m. Third insists there were no names at all. Rumor spreads faster than official information. A person who hears their own name whispered may have no way of discovering whether it truly appeared in a confession or whether someone simply invented the story. That uncertainty creates fear. A woman who once visited the executed prisoner begins, remembering every conversation they ever had. A man who bought herbs from her wonders whether someone saw him enter the house. A Rez considers leaving the village before authorities begin asking questions, and leaving can look suspicious. Once again, ordinary behavior becomes difficult to interpret safely. The execution can also strengthen belief among those who support it. The prosecution. If officials condemned the woman, then perhaps the rumors were correct. If she confessed, then the suspicions were justified. If she named others, then the danger was larger than anyone imagined. The death, therefore, becomes evident, in its own right. The community has watched a person officially declared a witch and publicly punished. For people who trusted the court, the execution confirms that witches truly had been living among them. Now every unexplained event carries additional weight. Chart falls sick several days later. Someone asks whether another witch is retaliating. A cow dies. Perhaps the executed woman had an accomplice. A storm arrives unexpectedly. Was the witch hunt incomplete? This is how one prosecution could prepare the emotional ground for another. The original accusation may have involved a single quarrel. But after the execution, the community has learned an entirely different story. Witches exist nearby. Authorities can identify them. Confessions reveal hidden networks, and punishment can remove them. The logic becomes self-reinforcing, yet doubt existed as well. Not everyone standing at an execution necessarily believed the condemned person was guilty. Some witnesses regretted participating. Others became uncomfortable when accusations multiplied. Clergy and judges sometimes began questioning whether confessions obtained under pressure could be trusted. Relatives protested innocence. Communities could become divided between people demanding more prosecutions and people convinced that the hunt had gone too far. These disagreements sometimes became sharper after executions. Imagine an alehouse several nights later. Firelight flickers across wooden tables. Cups strike the surface as people talk in low voices. One man says the woman confessed and therefore deserved what happened. Another says anyone would confess after enough suffering. A third warns both, puff them to stop discussing it. The room becomes quiet. Even skepticism can feel dangerous during a panic. To defend an accused which too strongly might cause others to wonder why. Was there a relationship between them? Was the defender involved? Did they attend the same secret gatherings? Fear does not require everyone to believe the same thing. It only requires enough people to become uncertain about what others believe. Meanwhile, the children of the condemned may continue walking the same roads. Their mother once walked. They still need food. They still attend church. They still pass the poems of witnesses who testified against her. Perhaps other children repeat what they heard their parents say. Perhaps they call the dead woman a witch. Perhaps the family name itself becomes associated with the trial. For a child, the great theological theories behind witchcraft mean very little. What matters is much simpler. Someone who was there is no longer there. The chair remains empty. Voice is gone. The household has become quieter. This personal cost often disappears behind the enormous numbers used to describe the European witch hunt. Tens of thousands were executed across several centuries, but each execution occurred inside a network of relationships. Every condemned person had some combination of neighbors, relatives, creditors, enemies, friends, children, or spouses. A witch hunt did not remove an isolated figure from a village. It tore someone out of an existing community, and the empty space remained. Several weeks pass. Grass begins pushing through the disturbed earth near the execution ground. Rain darkens the remaining pieces of charred wood. Eventually the stake may be removed or replaced when another execution is scheduled. The physical traces disappear surprisingly quickly. The stories last much longer. Years later, someone may point toward the field and explain what happened there. A child who watched from the crowd grows old and tells grandchildren about the day a witch was burned. The house where the accused lived receives a new occupant, but neighbors still remember who lived there before. A strange mark in a beam becomes associated with her. A local legend begins changing the facts. Perhaps people claim she cursed the village as she died. Perhaps they say the weather changed at the moment. The fire was lit. Perhaps they insist her ghost was later seen along the road. Historical events gradually become folklore. The real woman disappears beneath the story of the witch. As evening falls, you walk once more along the road toward the village. The execution ground lies behind you now. Ahead, smoke rises gently from familiar houses. Animals are being brought in for the night. A bell sounds from the church tower. At one cottage, a family closes the shutters. At another, someone places a protective object near the doorway. And farther down the road, several people are discussing a new name. The first execution has not made. The village feels safer. It has taught everyone what to look for. and in the worst witch-hunting periods of Europe. That was when a local tragedy could become something much larger, chain of accusations, capable of moving from house to house, village to village, until entire regions began searching for witches among themselves. Chapter 13. When a witch hunt became a panic, the first sign is not the fire, it is the knock. Another door opens before sunrise, then another a few streets away. By midday, people are no longer speaking about one accused witch, but 3. By evening, the number has grown again. A cart passes through the village, carrying someone toward the town jail. Children stop playing to watch it disappear. A woman standing near the well lowers her voice and says she heard there are more names on a list. The next morning, everyone knows someone who is frightened. This is the point where a witch hunt can stop behaving like an investigation and begin behaving like a panic. Most witchcraft prosecutions in Europe never reached this scale. Many remained isolated cases involving 1 or 2 accused people. Some ended without conviction. Others resulted in a single execution and no wider outbreak. But in particular places and periods, accusations began multiplying faster than authorities could resolve them. Once that happened, the structure of the hunt itself could create more suspects. The process often began with confession. An accused person was questioned. About accomplices, names were demanded. Those people were arrested and questioned in turn. If several of them confessed and named still more people, investigators received what appeared to be independent confirmation that an organized network existed. 2. The officials involved. This could look like discovery. In reality, the investigation might be generating the very conspiracy it believed it was uncovering. Imagine a table in a magistrate's chamber. Papers cover its surface. At first, there is one deposition describing a dead cow and a quarrel. Now there are dozens. Beside one prisoner's name are the names of 4 alleged accomplices. Beside another are 6 more. Several of those names appear repeatedly. A clerk draws connections. The same woman has been named by 3 prisoners. Surely that cannot be coincidence. But if all 3 prisoners were asked similar questions, exposed to the same rumors, or pressured to identify the same suspected people, the repetition may reveal more about the investigation than about any hidden gathering. Inside the town, this distinction is invisible. People hear only that witches are confessing. The church bells seem to ring more often now. Sermons become more urgent. Authorities warn that Satan may have infiltrated the community. Families begin watching neighbors with greater suspicion. A person who would previously have dismissed an odd event now wonders whether it should be reported. Every unexplained misfortune acquires a new possibility. A horse collapses. A child wakes, screaming. A loaf of bread fails. Milk sours. Someone hears footsteps outside after midnight. A woman is seen leaving another house late in the evening. Normally, these things vanish into everyday life. During a panic, they remain. They are remembered. They are discussed. And eventually, some are written down. The atmosphere changes because accusation is no longer unusual. Once several people have been arrested, reporting another suspicious neighbor begins to feel reasonable. If officials themselves are declaring that a hidden network exists, then the person who notices strange behavior may believe they are helping protect the community. That belief can spread rapidly. Walk through the market now, and conversations differ from the ones you heard weeks earlier. People are still selling grain, meat, cloth, candles, and tools. But nearly every group seems to be discussing the arrests. Someone points discreetly toward a woman purchasing vegetables and says, "Her sister has been questioned." Another man claims that a prisoner confessed to seeing 20 witches at a gathering outside town. The number grows. With every retelling, 20 becomes 30.30 becomes 50. No, one knows where the original number came from. Fear does not require accuracy. It requires repetition during the most intense witch persecutions in Central Europe. Entire regions experienced this kind of expansion. The fragmented political landscape of the Holy Roman Empire contained hundreds of territories with their own rulers, courts, and legal traditions. Some authorities pursued witchcraft cautiously. Others became deeply committed to eliminating it. The prince-bishoprics of Bamberg and Würzburg produced some of the most notorious persecutions of the 17th century. Hundreds of people were executed during severe waves of trials. In such episodes, accusations could reach far beyond the social margins. Wealthy citizens, local officials, clergy, and members of respected families could eventually be drawn into the process. That development often frightened communities more than the first arrests. Had an old poor widow could be explained away as someone already considered suspicious. But when a respected merchant was arrested, people began asking different questions. If he could be a witch, who could not? The answer became terrifying. No one. Social standing, reputation, and wealth could. Protection only while the courts continued trusting them. Once investigators believed Satan had infiltrated every level of society. Respectable behavior itself could be interpreted as disguise. The devil, according to this logic, would not choose only obvious suspects. He would hide his servants well. The reasoning made innocence increasingly difficult to prove. A prisoner who confessed was guilty. A prisoner who denied everything was stubborn. A person with a bad reputation was suspicious. A person with an excellent reputation might simply be hiding more successfully. The theory could absorb almost any contradiction. Inside the jail, space begins running out. Outro, and with that, the last light fades from the village. The roads we followed are empty now. The courtroom has fallen silent. The doors of the prison have closed. The crowds have left the execution field, and the smoke that once rose above the rooftops has disappeared into a sky belonging to another century. For the people who lived through the European witch hunts, these events were not legends. They were not stories written for distant generations. They happened among familiar houses, beside village wells, inside churches and courtrooms, and between neighbors who may have known one another for most of their lives. Tonight we were able to walk quietly through a small part of that world. We woke before sunrise inside an early modern village and listened as the first church bells carried across the rooftops. We watched smoke rise from hearths while families began another ordinary day. We looked inside homes marked with old protections against forces their occupants believed could enter unseen. We followed healers and cunning folk along the uneasy boundary between medicine, prayer, tradition, and forbidden magic. We watched ordinary misfortune begin to change its meaning. A sick child, a dead animal, a failed harvest, an angry word spoken at the wrong moment. We saw how those small events could become rumors, how rumors could become accusations, and how accusations could eventually travel from a village doorway to a magistrate's table. Then we followed them farther, into the interrogation room, into the courtroom, into the cell, and finally out beyond the town where the crowd gathered. Around the fire, it is easy, centuries later, to reduce the witch hunts to numbers, dates, laws, and famous trials. But every number represented an individual life. Every accusation entered a household. Every execution left an empty place, somewhere behind it. And eventually the fires faded. The roads remained. The villages remained. The stories remained. And over generations, the people themselves slowly disappeared beneath the legend of the witch. If you enjoyed spending this time inside the past with me, I would love to have you join us again. Please consider subscribing to Whispering Tomes. It is one of the simplest ways you can support these long-form histories, and it lets me know that you would like to see more immersive journeys like this one. There are many more stories already waiting for you here as well. If tonight's journey through the European witch hunts interested you, take a look through the other tales on the channel. You can explore the strange history of witchcraft itself, travel into the story of the Devil's Bible, uncover the legends surrounding Lilith, enter the world of the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous hammer of witches, or simply choose another forgotten corner of history and allow it to carry you somewhere else for the night. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like before you go. It may seem like a very small thing, but likes, comments, and subscriptions help you to understand that people want more videos like these. For a channel like Whispering Tomes, that support makes a much greater difference than you might imagine if you have not already. Leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is there right now. Maybe you are listening late at night, with the rest of the house already asleep. Maybe it is early morning where you are. Perhaps you are working through the night, traveling, reading, relaxing, or simply allowing the sound of history to fill the room while you drift towards sleep. Genuinely enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And while you are there, tell me what part of tonight's journey stayed with you the most. Was it waking inside the village? The strange protections hidden inside early modern homes? The slow transformation of rumor into accusation? The courtroom? The fires? Or perhaps something smaller, one ordinary detail about daily life that made this distant world feel unexpectedly close? You can also leave a suggestion for where we should travel next. There are countless forgotten histories still waiting in the dark. Ancient cities after sunset. Medieval villages during the depths of winter. Old monasteries and forgotten manuscripts. Superstitions once accepted as ordinary truth. Strange professions. Lost rituals. Folklore. Religious. Mysteries. Haunted. Places whose real histories are stranger than the legends that replaced them. and countless ordinary people who lived and died without ever imagining that someone centuries later might want to hear their story. Those are the places we will continue, exploring here, slowly, quietly, one tome at a time. For now, though, there is nothing else you need to follow. The trial is over. The bells have stopped. The road through the village is empty. Imagine the last house at the edge of the settlement. A small window glows faintly beside the road. Inside, someone places another piece of wood onto the hearth and watches the sparks rise briefly before disappearing into the chimney outside. The fields stretch into darkness. The old execution ground has long since returned to grass or rain, has washed the ash into the earth. The footsteps of the crowds are gone. The names spoken in fear have faded, and the night has become quiet again. If you are still awake, you can stay here for a little while longer. There is nowhere you need to go. No questions left to answer. No names waiting to be called. Only the faint sound of the wind beyond the houses, but the distant movement of trees and the last warmth of the fire. Thank you for spending these hours with whispering tomes, obscure histories for sleep and relaxation. Subscribe if you would like to open another tome with me soon. Take a look at one of the other stories waiting on the channel. If you are not quite ready for the night to end, and if sleep has already begun finding you, then you can simply let this story fade. The village will remain here, quiet beneath the centuries, waiting whenever you decide to return. Until we open the next tome, rest well and good night.